Chapter 343. Her brother, who had doted on her for more than 10 years, refused to let her into the palace because of someone else. She had nowhere to vent her anger, so she could only torment the maids around her. When she returned home that night, a maid accidentally broke a teacup, so she ordered her to be beaten. The mournful cries outside had gradually died down. That maid had been raised by Imama. Imama couldn't bear to listen to her. She knew that the princess was punishing her as an example to warn her that her master was only one person, and her life was in her hands. At this time, the blue-robed officer came in. "Princess, I'm back. Have you found out which palace the King of England is staying in?" Junmei put down the teacup and asked anxiously. "I found it. It's in a side hall near the Golden Phoenix Palace, but it's heavily guarded. I'm afraid it won't be easy to get in," the blue-robed officer said worriedly. "It's good that you know where it is." Junmei breathed a sigh of relief. She was afraid that her brother had hidden him and she couldn't find him. Then she would really go crazy. Hearing the princess's words, it seemed that she wanted to secretly find the King of England. The blue-robed officer couldn't help but say, "Princess, His Majesty has ordered people to watch over the princess's residence and not let you take a step out. Why don't you wait until His Majesty calms down before entering the palace?" "No," Junmei rejected without hesitation. If she waited for half a month, wouldn't Xiao run away? She had finally caught him when he was down and out. If she waited any longer, her plan would be in vain. "I've never failed to get what I want. It was true in the past, and it is true now," Junmei said with determination. The blue-robed officer knew his master's temperament well and didn't dare to persuade her again. He just hoped that when His Majesty found out, it wouldn't implicate too many people. "I'll enter the palace tonight. Go and make the arrangements. Be discreet and don't let anyone find out," Junmei ordered. "Yes." The blue-robed officer accepted the order and left. Junmei walked in front of the mirror and reached out to touch her face. She couldn't understand why he wasn't moved by her even though she had dressed up so meticulously last night. A trace of doubt appeared in her eyes, but it was quickly drowned out by confidence. She had heard that he wasn't feeling well last night. Perhaps that was the reason why he wasn't willing to touch her. Then she would properly open her heart to him tonight and tell him about her admiration for him. She would explain that last night's matter wasn't her doing. If he knew that she loved him so much, even a rock would be moved. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but sit down and pick up the eyebrow pencil to draw. She wanted to show her best side to him tonight. Looking at the princess in front of the mirror, he felt that the princess was too conceited and too persistent, as if she had been possessed by Xiao. But she was no longer qualified to advise the princess. The maid outside, who was still breathing, was the result of disobeying her. He couldn't do anything about it. An hour later, they were informed that everything was ready. Junzi stood up and opened the door. She ordered everyone not to follow her before she left with the blue-robed officer. Beside the carriage stood 2 rows of the Princess Mansion's elites. Junzi revealed a satisfied smile before getting into the carriage. Tonight's matter could only succeed and not fail. In the side hall, it was brightly lit. Chu Qingyan carried a tray into the discussion room. At the table, Xiao, Hualing, and Turin were sitting in a corner. In front of them was a mountain of information. After reading it, they would put it to the side and write from time to time. Chu Qingyan placed the tray on another table and walked over to touch their teacups. She found that they were already cold, so she had Xining go and change them. Turin and Hualing saw her come over and bowed before continuing to write. Xiao put down the documents in his hands and looked up at her. "It's late. You should sleep early." "I've already slept for an entire afternoon, so I'm not sleepy now. I just brought some supper over. If you're hungry, eat some first." Chu Qingyan walked in front of him and said with a smile. As soon as Chu Qingyan finished speaking, Xiao called for his 2 subordinates to go eat. Hualing stretched and pulled Turin to fill his stomach. Chu Qingyan saw this and also placed a stack of pastries in front of him. Then she placed her hands on the table and asked curiously, "Have you found any useful clues until now?" Xiao picked up a piece of ice cream and nodded when he heard this. Junzi found a complete set of information. There are many useful things in there. As soon as he finished speaking, Hualing quickly said, "Little princess consort, you don't know, but when we saw this information, we felt that the world is so big and there are so many strange things. There are so many funny things in there." As soon as Hualing finished speaking, he received a cold glare from his master. He knew that he had misspoken and immediately lowered his head to eat his supper. On the side, Turin scolded him, "You deserve it." Hualing knew that he was in the wrong, so he ignored him. When Chu Qingyan heard Hualing say this, she casually picked up a piece of information to look at. Her curiosity was already piqued by the word funny. There weren't many things in the imperial family that could be called funny. Because she had often entered Big Ice Cube study before, he wouldn't care about anything she looked at, so Chu Qingyan just looked at it on her own. When Xiao Su on the side saw this, he felt a bit helpless. How could the imperial family's secrets be described as funny? It should be outrageous. He only hoped that this little fellow wouldn't be too shocked after reading it. The document in Chu Qingyan's hands happened to be the daily diet records of the previous Junlan emperor, who was also Jun Ziheng's grandfather. She casually flipped through the records, and her attention was drawn to one particular record. In the past, Jun Zisheng's grandfather was obsessed with longevity. When he heard that virgin boy's urine could slow down aging, he actually had his son, the previous emperor, pee for him to drink. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt like vomiting. She immediately closed the cover and saw the word secret written on it. She knew that it was probably sealed a long time ago and was only taken out because Big Ice Cube needed it. She casually flipped through the other documents. There was also a secret document. It was about the previous emperor's harem's promiscuity. The imperial concubine couldn't bear the loneliness and actually had an affair with a eunuch. She flipped through another secret investigation letter. It was about the truth of the harem's imperial concubine framing a favored imperial concubine and causing her to have a miscarriage. Chu Qingyan clicked her tongue. This Junlan imperial family was really chaotic. No, it should be that as long as there was a struggle for power, it would be this chaotic. But what she admired even more was that Junzi Sheng actually dared to show these things to Big Ice Cube. This was simply too embarrassing, all right? As if he saw through Chu Qingyan's thoughts, Xiao Su's eyes were tainted with the faint light of the candlelight and appeared gentle. Do you know why this prince wants to know everything about the Junlan imperial family's 3 generations of emperors, no matter how big or small, including their daily diet, daily hunting outside the palace, and daily pulse reading? Chu Qingyan looked into his eyes and couldn't help but ask why. Chapter 344. One day, the little girl would come into contact with these things. Although she was only 10 years old now, there were many things that had to be done when she was a child. Although he didn't want her to know about the evilness of the palace and the cunning of people so early, sooner or later, she would have to learn how to protect herself and make the most appropriate response in times of crisis. Because when you become an enemy, the first thing you have to know is everything in his life. Perhaps it's just a small matter, but it can become a fatal flaw. Xiao Su's tone was serious. Chu Qingyan nodded. She understood. This is called knowing yourself and your enemy, and you will never be defeated. That's right. Xiao Su nodded. Big ice block. Can you tell me about the current situation in Junlan? At this moment, she wasn't sleepy at all. She was very curious about the process of a great country being divided by a few vassals. Originally, he wanted to take this opportunity to tell her. Seeing that she had taken the initiative to mention it, Xiao Su nodded generously. When Chu Qingyan saw this, she immediately pulled over a chair and sat upright, listening attentively. Seeing her humble and eager to learn, Xiao Su curled his lips and began to explain. Thus, Chu Qingyan listened to Xiao Su's description and roughly knew what kind of situation Junlan was in. Gentleman Sheng's grandfather had 10 sons. One of them was born to the empress, and the rest were born to the concubines. Only 6 princes lived to adulthood, including the one born to the empress. In the end, he was made the crown prince at the age of 16. However, not long after he was made the crown prince, he died in an accident when he fell off a horse while hunting. When Gentleman Sheng's grandfather found out, he was so heartbroken that he wanted to die. In the end, he passed away. However, at this time, Gentleman Sheng's grandfather's personal butler took out an imperial edict. On it was written that he would pass the throne to the seventh prince, who was Gentleman Sheng's father. As soon as this imperial edict was issued, the other four princes questioned the credibility of this imperial edict. However, at that time, the four of them didn't have military power and couldn't do anything. Gentleman Sheng's mother, the seventh imperial concubine, was a powerful general at that time. She had 100,000 soldiers and horses under her command. At that time, she was stationed outside the capital. However, it was also at that time that rumors spread that Gentleman Sheng's father had killed his brother and father to obtain the throne. Due to the pressure of public opinion, even though the four princes had joined forces to resist, Junzi Sheng's father couldn't do anything to them. This was because if he continued to hold these brothers accountable, it would become evidence that Junzi Sheng had killed his father and the crown prince. As such, he could only give them a piece of land each and banish them from the capital. Unless it was an important festival, they couldn't return to the capital. However, it was precisely because of Gentleman Sheng's imperial father's decision to let the tiger return to the mountain, leaving behind future troubles. At that time, the four princes were named King Jing, King Jin, King Zhe, and King Ping. These four vassal kings were sent to their fiefs, but they didn't give up on the idea of fighting for the throne. When Gentleman Sheng's father began to reorganize the court, they secretly recruited soldiers and bought horses to win over the court officials. Soon, their strength became incomparable. However, by the time Gentleman Sheng's father realized it, these vassal kings had already reached a point where they couldn't be shaken. This became a sore point for Gentleman Sheng's father. Thus, the tug-of-war between the capital and the four vassal kings began. But soon, Gentleman Sheng's father's health deteriorated. For some reason, even the imperial doctors couldn't detect it. Then, Gentleman Sheng's father was assassinated and poisoned. The murderer couldn't be found, but people with discerning eyes knew that it was the vassal kings who did it. However, Gentleman Sheng's father didn't have any evidence and couldn't be arrested. In these years, Gentleman Sheng's father's health deteriorated. In the end, he passed away after passing the throne to Gentleman Sheng. Then, when Gentleman Sheng took over the throne, his brothers and sisters died one after another. Then, something strange happened. Thus, a new round of public opinion came. Gentleman Sheng was narrow-minded. After the registration, he began to eliminate future troubles around him. Rumors spread everywhere, and there were also objections in the court. At this time, the vassal kings began to get restless. It was said that they wanted to enter the capital to attack. However, as early as when Gentleman Sheng took over the throne, his grandfather's military power had already been handed over after his death. Now, the military power was divided into four parts, and it was simply not enough to resist the situation. Pull one hair and the whole body would be affected. These vassal kings were watching to see who would make the first move. So in fact, this was also a psychological battle. Once someone made the first move, the situation would be broken. Soon, the capital would be besieged, and then Junlin's territory would be nibbled away step by step. Chu Qingyan sighed softly. This situation could be said to have reached a critical point. It was no wonder that Gentleman Sheng was so anxious at this time. He didn't even care about his face as the ruler of a country and lowered his voice to seek help from the big ice cube. But in such a difficult situation, even if the big ice cube was an immortal, it would be difficult for him to solve it. Chu Qingyan subconsciously looked at the person in front of her, but from the afternoon until now, she hadn't seen the big ice cube show a trace of embarrassment. She was a little surprised. Could it be that the big ice cube had a countermeasure? Xiao Su guessed her thoughts and said lightly, "Although I don't interfere in the government affairs of other countries, the Ministry of Wind will send the collected information to me." So, in fact, from the beginning, you already knew the situation? Chu Qingyan widened her eyes. "Yes, now I'm just looking for a breakthrough." His answer was very calm, and his face was full of indifference, as if he was just looking for a way to eat the food in front of him. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but want to give him a thumbs up. The big ice cube was too prepared for a rainy day. "Don't be happy too early. Right now, everything is still unknown. Xiao Su reached out and knocked her on the head to prevent her from getting carried away. Chu Qingyin stuck out her tongue, then said, "Then I'll also help look for these people's weaknesses." As she spoke, she picked up the information and began to seriously look through it. When Xiao Su saw this, he let her do as she pleased. Sooner or later, she would learn these things. Right at this moment, a carriage stopped at the palace gates for inspection. "We were summoned into the palace by concubine Lin. This is the token." After the inspection, the guard in charge of inspection let them pass. "Princess, you've successfully passed." The blue-robed officer handed the token back to the person in the carriage. Junmei tossed the token in her hand. This was the token that concubine Lin had given her in order to curry favor with her. She had originally disdained it, but she didn't expect that she would have a use for it today. Her lips curled into a slight smile. "All right, hurry up." "Yes." The carriage driver drove, even faster on the long road. "Xiao Su, this consort will see you very soon." Junmei smiled softly in the carriage, her eyes filled with longing, as if she was meeting her lover. Chapter 345. No one knew that on the long road of the Imperial Palace, there was a carriage that was currently moving. The night was very dark, but there were large red lanterns hanging all over the palace, covering the entire palace in a yellow glow. The glazed tiles shined under the moonlight, making the entire palace look like a city that never slept. "Be careful, don't let the guards in the palace recognize you," Junzime warned. "Princess, you can rest assured. Everything has already been taken care of." The blue-robed officer replied in a low voice, his voice filled with confidence. Money makes the world go round. Adding in the fact that his cousin was in charge of patrolling the palace, he had already sent people away, so he wasn't worried that someone would suddenly appear on this road. Hearing her subordinate's reply, Junzime relaxed. In the side hall, Chu Qingyin was currently seriously helping to organize the information. Xiao Su was seriously looking at the important points his subordinate had marked out. Then he categorized them, differentiating the importance of each point. Huoling and Turin quickly flipped through the information, not letting go of any useful information. Xining stood on the side, yawning from time to time and rubbing her eyes from time to time, but no matter what her master told her to do, she wasn't willing. This was because she had to prepare hot tea and snacks for them, afraid that they would be hungry or thirsty. When she was tired, she would add some charcoal to the stove to make the entire room a bit warmer. Chu Qingyin saw that she was insistent, so she didn't rush her anymore. This kind of sleepless struggle made her feel as if she had returned to the time before the final exams of university. In order not to fail, the 6 people in her dormitory had stayed up all night reading books, doing questions, and discussing questions all night long. However, at that time, they were just cramming at the last minute, but that kind of drive was similar to now. It made her sigh when she recalled that time. Things had remained the same, but people had changed. Just as she was lost in thought, she felt a weight on her shoulder. She looked down and saw a slender hand that was fairer than a woman's. She looked along the blue sleeve and met a pair of eyes that were swirling with stars. Sometimes, she felt that it was very strange. The big ice cube's eyes seemed to change color. When he was quiet, it was like a calm stream. When he was angry, it was like a pitch-black whirlpool. When he was unfathomable, it was as dark as the night sky. When he looked at you with the kind of pitiful eyes, it would be like now, as dazzling as the glazed starlight. "What are you thinking about?" Xiao Su frowned slightly. When the little fellow met his eyes, she suddenly became absent-minded. This feeling was somewhat strange, as if the person who was firmly grasped in the palm of his hand had suddenly lost track of her. "Big ice cube, your eyes are like stars," she blurted out without thinking. "Is that so?" He couldn't help but relax his brows, and his mood suddenly became very good. His cold voice fell into her ears, successfully waking her up. Oh no, what the hell did she just say? Did he bring his brain with him? Her cheeks heated up, and she immediately buried her head in the information in her hands. She had really lost a lot of face. "Pretty, Big Ice Cube actually asked him if his eyes were pretty. She had never seen him care so much about his appearance before. She wanted to shake her head against her will, but in the end, she honestly nodded, but her eyes didn't dare to look at him. Do you still have your stars? Suddenly hearing his question, Chu Qingyan paused and pulled out a string from her lapel. Then the grape-sized star fell onto her hand. At this time, the room was a bit dark, but the star in her hand emitted a white light, instantly lighting up the entire room. Very good. Xiao Su patted her head and then continued to study the information on the table. Chu Qingyan was stunned on the spot. What did Big Ice Cube mean by this? He asked her if she had brought it, and she took it out. Then he said 2 words, very good. Moreover, the way he patted her just now, it seemed like he was patting a pet. Chu Qingyan felt a deep malice from this world. In the future, when she asked about this matter, she had already become the king of England's concubine. At that time, because she was too idle, she often liked to take out the past to pester him. And he also didn't refuse her intimacy and questions. He thought for a long time, then patted her head just like how he patted her head today, and then said slowly, You think that this king's eyes are pretty, but this king has already given you the best stars a long time ago. So when you think of this king in the future, just look at the stars, and you will see this king. After listening for a long time, Chu Qingyan belatedly realized that he actually knew how to say words of love. It was warm in the palace hall, and it was a world of difference from the cold outside. A door in the palace hall slowly opened from the inside, and a slender figure walked out. It was Chung Yin Luo, who couldn't sleep at night. She turned around and closed the door, then walked slowly in a random direction in annoyance. Today, as soon as she lay on the bed, she would recall everything that happened last night. Throwing herself at him, pestering him, her abnormal behavior after being poisoned, and what he said. Because of what she said, it caused him to be absent-minded in front of her. Xiaoyan, you haven't smiled at me like this for a long time. This sentence echoed in her ears, and her mind went blank. Then she quickly shook her head, trying to get rid of these words that had been echoing in her mind. Are you finally willing to forgive me? It rang again. She felt that she had no other choice, so she simply walked back in despair with her arms crossed. She wanted to come out to calm down, but it seemed that it didn't work. She lay back on the bed and tossed and turned. At least the quilt was warm. Just as she was about to turn around and go back, she felt a weight on her shoulders, and warmth fell on her body, instantly enveloping her. It was a familiar smell. It was a faint grass fragrance, which was different from the smell of many men. She guessed that it was him. Morongju, why are you following me? Because she didn't have to carry him, she had a little confidence. I didn't follow you. I just couldn't sleep, so I came out for a walk and happened to run into you. His voice sounded behind her. It seemed a little hoarse, but he managed to suppress it. Chung Yin Luo closed her eyes, then turned to look at him. Morongju didn't expect that she would suddenly turn around and was a little stunned. Then he smiled modestly. Can't you sleep too? Morongju, what happened today? She hesitated for a moment, but didn't know how to start. Although she was poisoned, she did intend to violate him. And the person who saved her was also him. You don't have to explain. I know you had no choice at that time. It's all in the past. He stopped her from continuing. With Xiaoyan's character, she had never been willing to forgive herself. She must be very upset that something like this had happened. She had always had a strong self-esteem. Ethereal was afraid that she would be unhappy, so he chose to end the awkward situation between them in a casual way. However, he was wrong. Chapter 346. If it was as he thought, she wouldn't have been unable to sleep all night. Chung Yin Luo couldn't help but smile sarcastically at his words. Morongju, you're more heartless than I am. You were like this in the past, and you're still like this now. Every time someone panicked and didn't know what to do, because of you, you would always be able to easily withdraw without a single drop of water. Morongju, I was just delirious at that time, but I didn't lose my memory. I just don't want to admit that I've almost let go of my hatred for you. But you're too disappointing. I'm so disappointed. I'll return it to you. Chung Yin Luo pulled the cloak off her shoulder and threw it at him, then turned around and prepared to leave quickly. However, when she brushed past him, her hand was grabbed by a strong force, making it impossible for her to leave or break free. Morongju, what do you want? She lowered her voice and flew into a rage out of humiliation. She didn't want him to see her wishful thinking again. She had lost face once, and she didn't want to lose face again. At this moment, more than a dozen footsteps were heard coming in their direction. Unlike the heavy and orderly patrolling soldiers, Ethereal immediately stopped talking and let go of Chung Yinluo's hand. He stuck close to the wall in front of him and paid attention. Sure enough, he saw more than a dozen figures appear outside the palace through the hollowed-out wall carvings. He immediately frowned. Xiao, it seems that someone wants to harm Master. Go back to your room and protect yourself. Don't come out. Ethereal didn't look back as he instructed her, then quickly ran toward the main hall. While Ethereal was instructing her, Chung Yinluo looked down at her wrist. When the warmth disappeared, she knew that she was going to be abandoned again. She suddenly understood the reason why she resented him for so many years. It was also the answer to the question she had been asking herself. It turned out that the problem between the two of them wasn't about who liked the other more, but which one of them was more important in his heart, her or him. However, the answer was that in his heart, his responsibility was more important than hers. It was the same last time, and it was the same this time. If he had put down his responsibilities and come back to look for her in these 6 years, he wouldn't have ended up like this today. Unfortunately, she curled her lips, but her tone was more self-deprecating. What could she do if she fell in love with such a man? Forget it, so be it. She tightened her grip on the cloak that he had draped over her body again and immediately headed towards the main hall. At this moment, she was already on the same boat as the little girl and the others. She couldn't just sit and wait for death. Actually, what she didn't want to admit was that the person she cared about was also among them. Ethereal quickly flashed in the main hall and saw the people who were seriously reviewing the information. Master, there are people coming. There are about 15 or 16 of them. I'm afraid they're almost at the door. Ethereal didn't stop and spoke quickly. Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Xiao Su frowned slightly. Gentleman Sheng had promised him that there would be no guards inside the palace, but there would be a large number of guards outside to protect the entire palace. However, after listening to Ethereal's words, there were no sounds of fighting. This proved that there were no guards outside. That was why those people could enter the palace so easily. Turin and Huoling had already stood up and pulled out their weapons. To be able to have such authority in the palace, could it be? Chu Qingyan already had a guess. Xiao Su's expression immediately darkened. It seemed that he had also guessed it. As if to confirm their guesses, a sharp voice came from outside. Your Highness, this consort has come to bring you back to the palace. Just as the proud and confident voice fell, the person arrived. Junzi Mei appeared at the entrance of the palace in a beautiful red dress. She immediately saw Xiao Su standing in the crowd. She pursed her lips into a smile and leisurely walked over. Princess, I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you to come so late at night. Please return. Xiao Su's tone was indifferent. To be able to waste so much time talking to her at such a busy time was already very kind of big ice cube. Chu Qingyan looked at Junzi Mei, who had come with ill intentions, and was a bit angry. She didn't sleep in the middle of the night and came to disturb people. Only this brainless princess would do something like this. Your Highness, can you have these miscellaneous people withdraw? This consort has something to say to you. Junzi Mei didn't think that Xiao Su would treat her so coldly. She swept her eyes over the crowd and saw that there were so many people here. Her expression was a bit ugly as she spoke in disdain. There aren't any miscellaneous people here. Princess, if you have something to say, just say it. This prince is very busy. Xiao Su continued to flip through the information and didn't say anything else. He looked like he didn't want to pay attention to her. Chu Qingyan felt that if it weren't for the agreement he made with Jun Zixing and giving Jun Zixing face, Big Ice Cube probably would have directly told her to scram. Junzi may have been pampered since she was young. When had she ever been treated like this? She gritted her teeth and glared hatefully at Xiao Su. However, she knew that his personality had always been like this. She should get used to it. So she restrained the anger that was about to erupt and did her best to appear gentle. Your Highness, this time, Junzi Mei has a few things to say to Your Highness. The first thing is to apologize. This consort didn't know that the incense was poisoned. At that time, this consort only took some medicine from the estate's physician that could calm the nerves and induce sleep. Unexpectedly, that physician had ulterior motives and switched the medicine. This matter has nothing to do with Junzi Mei, but I still cause your highness to be frightened. It's Junzi Mei's fault. Junzi Mei looked like she was filled with self-blame and looked like she was about to cry. Chu Qingyin's mouth twitched. This Junzi Mei's ability to turn right and wrong upside down was as strong as her brain damage value. That night, she dressed like that and tried to curry favor for no reason. Did she really think that they were easy to fool? Ethereal said that if it wasn't for the fact that the snake's kiss poison in Big Ice Cube's body was extremely domineering and couldn't coexist with other poisons, Big Ice Cube would have already been infected by the Dove of Joy. This Junzi Mei really was thick-skinned. The second thing is that Junzi Mei fell asleep last night. When I woke up this morning, I found out that your highness had been taken away by my imperial brother. Junzi Mei knew that your highness was also threatened by my imperial brother and had no choice but to do so. Thus, Junzi Mei took the risk of being punished by my imperial brother to enter the palace and bring your highness back. As soon as Junzi Mei finished speaking, Chu Qingyin burst into laughter. Junzi Mei felt like her dignity had been greatly challenged, and she glared daggers at Chu Qingyin. Miss Chu, you seem to have a problem with this consort's words? Could it be that this consort has said something wrong? Junzi Mei threatened Chu Qingyin. She no longer had the coquettish attitude she had when speaking to Xiao Su earlier. This person really was like the weather in July, changing at will. No, it should be that she had two faces. Chu Qingyin originally didn't want to bother with this brain-damaged princess, but she couldn't swallow the fact that someone else was trying to invade her territory. She had the right to protect the integrity of her territory. It was necessary to defend her territory. Chapter 347. When Junzi Mei saw Chu Qingyin's half-smile, she immediately felt that this person was truly an eyesore. She wanted nothing more than to get rid of her. Chu Qingyin ignored her piercing glare and said with a mocking smile, "Princess, we can let bygones be bygones for the first matter, but I'm afraid we can't agree to the second matter." You, Junzi Mei wanted to retort, "What right do you have to make decisions for Xiao Su?" But she was afraid that Xiao Su would say that she was exercising her duties as a princess, so she could only swallow her words. "This consort wants to hear your highness's thoughts." She changed the topic to Xiao Su. Xiao Su didn't even raise his head when he heard this. Qingyin's words are this prince's thoughts. You, Junzi Mei was stunned, then said, "Your highness, are you really going to be so heartless to Zimei?" Xiao Su's fingers paused, then he calmly replied, "If there's no love, how can there be heartless? Princess, you're thinking too much." "Xiao Su, how can you say that? Zimei has admired you for a long time." Junzi Mei bit her lip as tears streamed down her face. Right now, she couldn't care less about her princess bearing. She was just a young girl in love who couldn't obtain the love of her beloved. Many thanks. Xiao Su didn't feel any connection with her because she was a princess or because she was a woman. In his eyes, insignificant people weren't worth wasting his energy on. Just a single many thanks and nothing else. Junzi Mei stared blankly at the person who was still sitting in front of her. She had fallen in love at first sight, been attached to after parting, and had missed him for 2 years. She was full of affection, but in the end, all she got was a single many thanks from him. It was still a polite greeting without any emotion. She felt like she was going crazy. You have the right to admire someone, but this prince has the right to not accept. Xiao Su frowned slightly. This person was too noisy. He was about to order someone to chase her out. Junzi Mei felt deeply hurt when she heard this. She held onto an infatuated heart, but it was trampled on so wantonly. She couldn't swallow this anger. That was how love turned to hate. "Xiao Su, you've gone too far." Junzi Mei was furious. Upon hearing this, Chu Qingyin had a bad feeling. As expected, Junzi Mei waved her hand. "Men, take him away." As soon as he finished speaking, more than a dozen guards outside immediately appeared and pointed their weapons at them. Turin, Huling, and the others also brandished their swords, and the scene suddenly reached a white-hot stage. Junmei, aren't you afraid of your imperial brother finding out that you're using force in the imperial palace? Chu Qingyan stepped forward and questioned. She didn't expect Junmei to be this crazy. Even if my imperial brother found out, he would only scold this consort. In his eyes, this consort is the younger sister he watched grow up. So of course this consort is more important than you outsiders. How could he side with outsiders? Junzi Mei felt like Chu Qingyan was simply joking, so she looked at her with disdain. Chu Qingyan felt like this person really didn't bring her brain with her when she went out. This wasn't a matter of deep sibling love, but rather, as a princess, she actually dared to openly lead troops into the imperial palace. This was already offending the authorities' reverse scale. No matter how much Junzi Sheng cherished her, she would still bear a grudge because of her actions. Princess, it's late. You should go back. Chu Qingyan felt like this princess was brainless, but she was still a girl who had lost herself in love. She sighed. If she drew her sword, the one who would be injured in the end would only be herself. However, Junmei felt that Chu Qingyan was demonstrating her strength at this time, so she ordered, "Capture this stinky girl who doesn't know what's good for her." As soon as her voice fell, the soldiers didn't have time to make a move when they heard the sound of a heavy slap on the table. Junmei looked over and saw Xiao Su slamming the brush in his hand on the table. He looked at her coldly. People need face, and trees need bark. Princess, is this prince not clear enough? If you dare to touch a single hair of this prince's people, this prince doesn't mind letting you taste the taste of Junlin's decline. It wasn't that easy to take back the military power of the vassal kings, but it was as easy as flipping one's hand to start a war between the vassal kings and the capital city. Junmei was startled. She wasn't startled by his words, but by his tone. Although he was cold, he had never been so ruthless to her. She didn't know that he had always been indifferent to people who didn't matter, unless someone touched his reverse scale. Xiao Su, it's fine if you don't like me, because you don't understand me. As long as you give me time, I will definitely. Junmei was so frightened that she didn't know what to do. She didn't want him to hate her, so she changed from her arrogant and rude attitude to a submissive one. However, this made Xiao Su even more impatient. This prince doesn't want to see you again. Scram. Although the princess's ability to change her expression was amazing, Chu Qingyan didn't feel that there was anything to pity. Normal people would be dissatisfied with people who rashly intruded into other people's lives and tried to cause trouble. She didn't think that the ice cube was heartless. With his temperament, he had already given Junmei Sheng a lot of face by waiting until now. In the ice cube's eyes, Junmei was just a walking piece of wood. He didn't care at all. If it weren't for Junmei Sheng's face, Junmei would have been thrown out by now. Xiao Su, fine. You're ruthless enough. Don't think that this prince will let you off just because of this. Men, arrest all of these people. Junmei's eyes were malevolent. She didn't look as beautiful as she did when they first met. She looked like a living witch. Chu Qingyan thought to herself, this is her true face. Just as the soldiers were about to step forward, a cold shout rang out. Junmei, what are you doing? Junmei's body trembled. Her imperial brother had arrived. She turned to look at the people who were entering the palace in a single file. She found her imperial brother's direction and ran over. The guilty party complained first. Imperial brother, these people actually dared to humiliate me. You have to help me vent my anger. Oh, no, other than Xiao Su. Throw everyone else into prison. Junmei sobbed as she complained to her imperial brother. Junmei, have you caused enough trouble? Junmei Sheng stood in the middle of the palace. Seeing his imperial sister sobbing so hard that she couldn't speak made him feel vexed. If he hadn't received a report from Xiao Su's subordinates, he didn't know what kind of trouble his imperial sister would have caused in the palace. Imperial brother, why did you? Junmei was so frightened that she forgot to cry. If this prince hadn't come, who knows what kind of trouble you would have caused? Junmei Sheng said, exasperated. Imperial brother, please listen to your imperial sister's explanation. Before Junmei could finish, Junmei Sheng interrupted her. Men, take the princess away. Detain the others, Junmei Sheng ordered coldly. A large group of imperial guards immediately rushed forward. Thus, Junzi Mei was unwillingly dragged away. Chapter 348. When the palace was quiet again, Junzi Sheng turned to Xiao Su and said, "King of England, I'm sorry to have startled you. I didn't know that the guards of Junlan Palace were so weak." Xiao Su looked at him coldly. Junzi Sheng knew that he was in the wrong. He had promised him that he wouldn't let his sister disturb him, but he went back on his word tonight. "I'll strengthen the security and won't let anyone barge in," Junzi Sheng promised. "There won't be a next time." Xiao Su sat down again, clearly unwilling to pay any more attention to him. Junzi Sheng saw that he was still sorting out the documents in the middle of the night, and his anger dissipated. He could only blame his sister for asking for humiliation. Then, King of England, rest early. With that, Junzi Sheng left with his men. Chu Qingyan looked at Junzi Sheng's departing figure, seemingly helpless. She couldn't help but sigh softly. Junzi Sheng was really unlucky to be in such a mess and have such an unreliable sister. He was really drunk. "Why are you sighing?" A cold voice suddenly sounded. Chu Qingyan replied, "I just feel a little pity for Junzi Sheng. I feel that it's been hard for him to be the emperor." Xiao Su smiled mockingly. "This is everyone's fate. Since it's already decided, there's no right to resist." Chu Qingyan was stunned. The big ice cube had always been cold and wouldn't judge others, but when she heard his words, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but turn to look at him, only to see that he had lowered his head and was seriously reading the documents. A wave of pity welled up in her heart. It was because the big ice cube felt the same way that he said those words. However, his methods were different from Junzi Sheng's. In the same situation, he had done far more than Junzi Sheng, and it was even more bitter. He didn't even receive a trace of gratitude. On the contrary, Junzi Sheng received more. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips and smiled. "That's right. You have to finish the path you chose, even if you have to kneel down, right?" She wanted to lighten the mood, but the unromantic person threw her a sentence. "There are 10 more records here. Take them all." What the hell? She had already decided to go to bed. That big ice cube, "I'm sleepy." She fought for some time to rest. "Didn't you say that you have to finish the path you chose, even if you have to kneel down? Didn't you say you wanted to stay and help?" Xiao Su looked at her, amused. Well, this was simply shooting himself in the foot. Who asked him to be so talkative? Chu Qingyan finally realized what it meant by a loose tongue. Thus, she obediently picked up the notebook and read it without missing a single word. In the silent night, even the hall was quiet, except for the sound of pages being flipped from time to time. Xiao Su looked up and saw the little girl rubbing her eyes and taking notes seriously. A touch of gentleness flashed through his eyes. He couldn't bear for her to suffer, but some things had to be experienced, so he had to force himself to watch her grow. Chu Qingyan did not notice how gentle his gaze was on her, as she was completely focused on the book. Inside the hall, Turin and Huoling were reorganizing the information. Ethereal saw that he couldn't help much, so he turned around to leave. But when he turned around, he saw his junior sister standing to the side. He was a bit surprised and wanted to go up to her, but she turned around and left the hall. "Xiaoyan, didn't I tell you to go back to your room? Why did you come out?" Ethereal walked past her and stopped in front of her. Cheng Yinluo stopped in her tracks. She didn't want to pay attention to him, but in the end, she still raised her head and indifferently replied, "I was worried about Qingyan, so I followed her to take a look." Ethereal was stunned by the distant look in her eyes and forgot what he wanted to say. His head was a bit dizzy right now, so he stood there in a daze. She didn't hear any response from him, so Cheng Yinluo ignored him. She turned around and planned to walk past him, but she suddenly saw his body sway, and she subconsciously supported him. "What's wrong with you?" Before she could finish speaking, she could feel a burning sensation under her fingers through his clothes. She was slightly startled. "Are you having a fever?" After Ethereal steadied himself, his eyes regained some clarity. He smiled. "It's nothing. I might have caught a cold. You should go back and rest. It's getting late." With that, he planned to turn around and return to his room, but suddenly, another wave of dizziness hit him, forcing him to support himself against the wall. Cheng Yinluo looked at him and frowned hesitantly. He had always been in good health, so the sudden fever probably had something to do with last night. She had almost stripped him naked, but he had given her his outerwear to take care of her. Perhaps he had caught a cold then, and with the torment of the past 2 nights, even if his body was made of iron, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. Ethereal originally wanted to wait for the dizziness to subside before returning to his room, but he realized that the situation was far worse than he had imagined. At this moment, he suddenly felt a tug on his arm, and someone wrapped their arms around his waist. He lowered his head and looked at the slender hand supporting him. He turned to look at the person beside him in disbelief. Xiao, I'll help you back to your room. You might get worse after a while. Cheng Yinluo lowered her eyes. Her tone was calm, devoid of any emotion. However, this was already a very good improvement for Ethereal. He wanted to speak again, but she cut him off. Don't talk nonsense. I'm just trying to be a doctor. I can't leave you in the lurch. She seemed to be trying to convince herself. After that, she stopped talking and helped him back to his room. Ethereal only smiled at her. Actually, he was already very satisfied to receive Xiaoyan's concern. It was better than not contacting her for the rest of his life. She supported him. From behind, it looked as if they were walking in each other's arms. Mr. Chu closed the window and smiled mischievously at Mr. Chu, who was half sitting on the couch. Dan Yang, the relationship between Kong Kongzi and Lil Yama seems to have improved. Why are you so worried? Don't cause trouble for them. Mrs. Chu's voice was still a little hoarse from the cold. She coughed lightly after a few words. Mr. Chu hurriedly poured her a cup of honey water and patted her back. He coaxed her. Dan Yang, don't cough. Drink some water and you'll be fine. Good girl. Mrs. Chu shook her head with a smile. She drank the water from his hand and said, I'm not a child. You don't have to coax me like this. Mr. Chu shook his head. That girl, Kai Kai, is already pregnant, and I only have you. If I don't treat you well, who else can I treat well? Mrs. Chu had heard her husband's childish words of love so many times, but she felt sweet every time. Do you think highly of Her Highness and our daughter? My son-in-law is very good. He knows everything. Is there something you're worried about? Mr. Chu was puzzled. Mrs. Chu sighed. His Highness's status and ours are different. Plus, he's older than Kai Kai. I feel that, Mr. Chu chuckled. Dan Yang, your thinking is too old-fashioned. As long as you like each other, age doesn't matter. Status doesn't matter. Mrs. Chu couldn't help but laugh. Where did you hear that? But it does make sense. Mr. Chu raised his head proudly. I'm so smart. Of course, I'm self-taught. They laughed and chatted happily. The topic was over just like that. If it was true love, why would he care so much? Don't you think so? Chapter 349. In the Imperial Study, a battle of words was taking place. No, it was a one-man show. Junzi Mei looked at her brother in front of her, unable to understand. She wanted to smash everything in the hall. Brother, why won't you let me see Xiao Su? Do you know how much I care about him? Jun Mei asked angrily. Jun Mei Sheng held his forehead with one hand. He hadn't slept well for 2 nights in a row. The culprit was right in front of him. Zimei, you're the princess of a country. You should act like one. What's wrong with you? Besides, you're a girl and unmarried. Don't you feel ashamed that you keep mentioning a stranger's name? Jun Mei Sheng's good temper was exhausted. He spoke coldly. Jun Mei relied on her brother's love for her and didn't notice the disappointment in his words. She sat on the chair and said confidently, Brother, ever since I met him 2 years ago, I've treated him as someone I'll marry for the rest of my life. Sooner or later, I'll take him down, so this isn't important anymore. Zimei. Jun Mei Sheng put down his hand and called out to her seriously. Jun Mei, who was about to ramble on, was frightened by his serious look. She bit her lip and didn't say anything else. You're the princess of Junlan. Your status is incomparably noble. If you want anything, just say the word and someone will give it to you. This is understandable. But who is Xiao Su? He's the king of England of Sichuan. If you make things difficult for the lord of a country, this isn't a simple game. I can turn a blind eye to whatever you do in Junlan, but I won't allow it. Jun Mei Sheng lectured her with a stern face for the first time. But Jun Mei was obviously unconvinced. Brother, you told me not to make things difficult for him. Then what are you doing now? Aren't you detaining him too? Don't think that you can deceive me just because you've done it secretly. She felt that she and her brother were the same. There was nothing to say. Hearing Junzi Mei's words, Junzi Sheng laughed in anger. He also felt that his sister was hopeless. Sister, don't you know what state our country is in now? It can be said that we are besieged on all sides, with jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards eyeing us covetously. And we have racked our brains to keep Xiao Su here because we want to rely on his ability to get through this difficult time. But you have ruined it again and again. Do you really care about Junlan's safety? Junmei couldn't say a word. She felt that her brother was really angry. This was different from when she made him unhappy in the past. Junmei stammered. She was clearly frightened. A storm is brewing, yet you only care about your personal affairs. If this matter were to spread out, those people with bad intentions would use this matter to make an issue out of it. At that time, there would be many people who would mock our royal family. Now that things have come to this, Zimei, your royal brother is too disappointed in you. Jun Zixing closed his eyes, feeling somewhat pained. Brother, don't be angry. I was wrong. Junmei finally panicked. She could enjoy such treatment at this time, and no one dared to bully her because of her brother's love for her. Now that her brother was disappointed in her, how could she survive in Junlan in the future? Men, lock the princess in the princess's residence. Without my order, she is not allowed to leave the residence. Brother, flog all the people in the princess's residence and send them to the border. The princess's current situation is related to these servants. Brother, I was wrong. Send the imperial guards to guard the princess's residence. No one is allowed to enter or leave at will. Brother, after Junmei gave the order, Junmei was taken away with a wave of his hand. Being locked in the princess's residence and being grounded were two completely different things. Junmei looked at the palace with some despair. Did her brother really not want her anymore? Lao Bai reported that the princess had been sent back to the princess's residence, and even the people she had planted in the palace had been removed one by one. Only then did Junzi Sheng rub her brows. Zimei is used to being unreasonable. It's also my fault for being busy with state affairs and neglecting to discipline her. Choose 2 experienced nannies to teach her the rules of conduct and let her cultivate her character. Don't think about such nonsense. Lao Bai was very surprised by what His Majesty had done to the princess today. Usually, when the princess made mistakes, His Majesty would only punish her lightly. He had never been so strict as today. It was probably because the princess had reached into the harem. The spies she had planted were usually of high status in the palace. They had crossed His Majesty's bottom line, which was why he was so angry this time. Moreover, the princess had deluded herself into thinking of kidnapping the savior of Junlan. She was simply courting death. Fortunately, His Majesty pitted her as the only blood relative left in this world. Otherwise, the princess would have suffered more than just a little punishment. Your Majesty, you must also take care of your health. Junlan can't do without you. Lao Bai couldn't help but worry when she saw the dark circles under His Majesty's eyes. Junmei Sheng smiled bitterly and shook his head. He didn't reply. At this critical moment of life and death, and with the matter of his imperial sister, he already felt physically and mentally exhausted. At this time, the sky was gradually brightening. Let's go to morning court. Junmei Sheng stood up, smoothed the creases on his clothes, and strode out. Lao Bai followed behind. His Majesty was only in his early 20s, but there was already white hair in his hair. Her eyes felt sour. Everyone thought that the position was glorious and respected by tens of thousands of people. Little did they know that in order to sit firmly in that position, in addition to having a strong hand, one also had to have a strong ability to resist pressure. It was lonely at the top. In the side hall, Xiao Su closed the last bit of information and turned his head to look out the window. The sky was already bright. Huling and Turin had already gone to do something. On the side, the little fellow hugged more than a dozen account books and was sleeping soundly. Xiao Su couldn't help but smile when he saw this. He reached out and took the book away from her, but she didn't wake up. It could be seen that she was really tired after staying up all night. He stood up and reached through her arms and calves. He picked her up by the waist and turned to his room. Covering her body with the quilt, Xiao Su stroked her head. Then, he didn't stay any longer. He turned around and returned to the side hall. Master! Huling and Turin immediately came back after dealing with the matter of the fierce cavalry. Go and tell Junmei Sheng that this king has a way to deal with a vassal king, Xiao Su said lightly. His voice was clear and mellow, without any trace of staying up all night. Yes. Huling immediately went down. Last night, he had already memorized all the information about Junlan in his mind. After spending the night, he also found the flaws of these people. He had a bold plan in his heart. Junmei Sheng had just finished court when he heard the news. He couldn't believe it. In just one night, he had a way. If he didn't hear wrong, then this person was terrifyingly powerful. But he didn't dare to delay for a moment. He immediately took Lao Bai to the side hall. Chapter 350. When Junzi Sheng arrived at the side hall, Xiao Su and the others were already sitting and waiting for him. As soon as he saw Xiao Su, Jun Zixing ignored everyone's salutations and immediately greeted him. King of England, I heard that you found a way. Xiao Su wasn't as excited as Jun Zixing. He calmly reached out to Junzi Sheng and said, Your Majesty, please sit down. This king still has some things to confirm with your Majesty. Seeing Xiao Su's calm expression, Junzi Sheng knew that he had lost his composure. He sat down and tried to restrain the excitement in his heart. He returned to his usual steady and calm appearance and asked politely, King of England, if there's something you don't understand, you can ask me at any time. I'll tell you everything I know. Xiao Su nodded. Your Majesty, I have a few things to ask of you. Go ahead. Affected by Xiao Su's expression, Junzi Sheng said calmly. The first thing is the results of the investigation into the assassination of your imperial father. Xiao Su knew that this wasn't in the information, but he still had to study it with Junzi Sheng. Junzi Sheng was stunned at first because he didn't expect him to ask this. However, he immediately recalled the investigation at that time and said slowly, after imperial father was poisoned, the matter was handed over to the Supreme Court. In the end, it was found that it was done by concubine Lung and concubine Liang's family. They were quickly arrested and brought to justice. They confessed to this matter. Junzi Sheng felt that this matter was already over. He didn't know why Xiao Su would mention it again. Xiao Su heard this and said, Your Majesty, do you also think that this matter was really done by concubine Lung? King of England, what do you mean? Junzi Sheng didn't understand. This king found out that concubine Liang was timid by nature. She was framed and entered the cold palace. Her family only made their fortune from tea. After concubine Liang entered the palace, her family didn't have any brothers, nor did they have any connections. I don't know how her family got the secret poison of the imperial family. Also, where did they find such an elite assassin? Where did the silver come from? Xiao Su asked 3 questions in a row, leaving Gentleman Sheng speechless. When his father was poisoned, he was out training. By the time he returned, the matter had already been dealt with, so he didn't think too much about it. Now that Xiao Su asked this question, he also had many questions. As the ruler of a country, he had to take one step at a time. As long as someone gave him a hint, he would be able to see more deeply than others. For example, right now. King of England, what do you think? Gentleman Sheng looked at the person in front of him and asked sincerely. Xiao Su curled his lips when he heard this, but there was no trace of smile on his face. I heard that the eldest son of the Supreme Court Chancellor married King Ping's 3rd concubine's daughter. 5th uncle? Impossible. Junzi Sheng blurted out subconsciously. 5th imperial uncle is a refined and gentle person. How could he do such a thing? In response to Gentleman Sheng's disbelief, Xiao Su smiled indifferently. I'm just reminding you. But if he's really refined and gentle, then what about the 120,000 soldiers in his hands? Don't tell me it's for playing house. Gentleman Sheng fell silent. Xiao Su was right. Although 5th imperial uncle was really good to him when he was young, in the current situation, he couldn't see through 5th imperial uncle. However, he still had some doubts. The vassal king was waiting for an opportunity to act. It was 5th imperial uncle who sent a secret letter to me first. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known about the vassal king's movements so quickly. He's just a thief pretending to be a thief. Seeing that Gentleman Sheng was still doubtful, Xiao Su didn't force him. He said casually, "If you don't believe me, you can invite the Supreme Court Chancellor's family back to interrogate them. However, it has to be done in secret. You can also reopen the case from that year and re-examine it." In the imperial family, there was no blood to speak of. Conspiracies and deceit filled their lives. Xiao Su closed his eyes, as if recalling his hopeless 20 years in the past. Gentleman Sheng reluctantly nodded. "Okay, when I go back, I'll send someone to investigate. I still don't believe that fifth imperial uncle would do such a thing." Xiao Su ignored this question. "Second question, Your Majesty. Do you think that the strange deaths of your brothers and sisters in the past 6 months are strange?" Xiao Su asked faintly. Gentleman Sheng was very surprised. Xiao Su didn't think that his brothers and sisters were killed because he couldn't tolerate them like other people. After all, this was how rumors spread outside. "King of England, you don't doubt me?" Xiao Su looked at Gentleman Zixing as if he was an idiot. "I don't think that the person who built the mansions of my brothers and sisters would kill them. After all, a lot of manpower and material resources were spent on those mansions. If people died just like that, the losses would outweigh the gains. Because Junlon valued etiquette, those mansions were built according to the specifications of the princes and princesses. If the princes and princesses weren't there, they couldn't be awarded to the ministers. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in line with etiquette." Gentleman Sheng was a little moved. "Even an outsider like you believes me. But my people and relatives don't believe me. They all say that I'm cruel and merciless, killing my brothers and sisters. How could the people know so much? It's just that someone is adding fuel to the fire and spreading rumors." Xiao Su said leisurely. It was obvious that it couldn't be Gentleman Sheng. An emperor who hadn't established himself yet. How big of a hole was there in his brain to kill his brothers and sisters? Moreover, he didn't even spare the princesses. Then King of England. Do you know who's behind this? Gentleman Sheng was a little agitated again. Xiao Su looked at him coldly. "The rumors are still going on. Get someone to capture a few people who are making a big fuss and interrogate them. Then you'll know." Xiao Su felt that this person was extremely lucky to be able to be the emperor and had been for a few months at that. At this time, he was still intact. Gentleman Sheng seemed to have been enlightened and immediately nodded. "Yes, you're right. I'll give the order later." He had been so busy recently that he didn't have time to care about these things. Unfortunately, the rumors didn't get a good channel. Coupled with the deliberate guidance of someone with ulterior motives, it would soon ferment even more. At this time, Gentleman Sheng didn't quite understand. "King of England, you said that the person behind this killed my brothers and sisters. The reason is obvious. It's to make people misunderstand that I'm afraid that my brothers and sisters will fight for the throne and get rid of them quickly. The princesses are all women and don't have the qualifications to fight for the throne. Why would the person behind this be so ruthless? Could it be that they want to create an image of me as selfish and self-centered?" Xiao Su snorted coldly. "Of course the princesses won't fight for the throne. It's just that they're more valuable." Gentleman Sheng was very confused, but he didn't dare interrupt Xiao Su. He listened to him continue. "Generally, when a new emperor ascends the throne and his foundation is unstable and the country is in chaos, he will use the form of political marriages with other countries. This is used to check the power of some people." Gentleman Sheng understood immediately. "So the person behind this wants to cut off my escape route and doesn't give me any chance to make a comeback." Xiao Su didn't answer. He rubbed his forehead. Although this Gentleman Sheng wasn't stupid, he was still very stupid without someone to enlighten him. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted his next plan to be smoother, he wouldn't have been willing to talk so much with Gentleman Sheng. Chapter 351. Just talking about these two issues made Junzi Sheng explode with anger. But thanks to Xiao Su's analysis, he was able to sort out the problems that had been troubling him for the past few days. At the very least, he was no longer like a headless ball of string, unable to grasp the slightest clue. While drinking tea, Junzi Sheng could no longer hold back his temper. He repeatedly ordered Lao Bai to investigate the poisoning of the late emperor, the mysterious deaths of his royal siblings, and a mastermind behind the spreading of the rumors. Xiao Su was not in a hurry. After he finished giving his orders, he slowly spoke again. There is one more thing. It's about the concubines in the imperial harem. Zhun Zisheng immediately sat upright. King of England, there is no need to worry about Zhun. There is no harm in speaking. Xiao Su did not intend to be courteous with him. He leisurely leaned back in his chair and said with a languid expression, I heard that consort Xiao Shufei was not born as a harem and did not go through the selection process. Is this true? Consort Xiao Shufei was Jing Wang's Mufei and the child of Zhun Zisheng's grandfather. Zhun is not very clear on this matter. Zhun Zisheng shook his head, but he turned to Lao Bai and said, You should be clear on this matter. Come and talk to the King of England. Lao Bai had been by Zhun Zisheng's side this entire time. Just now, Xiao Su's words had dispelled the heavy dark clouds that had shrouded the capital. He had already felt admiration for Xiao Su. When the matter of consort Xiao Shufei was mentioned, he had wanted to explain. Now that His Highness asked, he did not hide anything and immediately replied. Consort Xiao Shufei was indeed not selected through the proper selection process. Because in Junlan, if a woman is of marriageable age or above and is unmarried, she can send a legitimate daughter to the palace to participate in the selection process. Back then, although consort Xiao Shufei was of marriageable age, she had a childhood playmate who was engaged at a very early age. Thus, she did not participate in the selection process. At this point, Lao Bai couldn't help but pause, as though he was thinking about how to continue. Zhun Zisheng was listening attentively. Seeing him suddenly stop, he was a little puzzled. Lao Bai, hurry up and tell me. Don't dilly-dally. Why did Xiao Shufei appear in the inner palace after missing the selection? He didn't think that Xiao Su would casually ask such a question. He would only mention it if it was useful, so he was a little dissatisfied with Lao Bai's hesitation. Xiao Su chuckled softly. It must have been a coincidence that Emperor Mingxian saw consort Xiao Shu and took her into his harem. Emperor Mingxian was the title of Grandpa Sheng. Lao Bai did not expect Xiao Su to know. He smiled awkwardly and said to His Majesty, The King of England is not wrong. That year, after the selection of talented women, it was the Mid-Autumn Festival. His Majesty Mingxian brought his ministers to tour the lake and happened to see Xiao Shufei, who was out sightseeing. Admiring her beauty and talent, he ordered people to inquire about her. Because he was the ruler of a country, Xiao Shufei's parents did not dare to disobey and sent their daughter to the palace. What? Imperial grandfather didn't know that Xiao Shufei was engaged? Grandpa Sheng was very surprised. Lao Bai smiled bitterly. Your Majesty, at that time, Your Majesty Mingxian had taken a fancy to her. How could this subject dare to disobey? I only heard that Xiao Shufei cried for several days when she heard that the marriage was bestowed and that so-called fiancé's family left the capital. Perhaps he was afraid of getting into trouble. If the ruler wanted a subject to die, the subject had to die. This was the principle. How could a subject dare to oppose the emperor? Grandpa Sheng knew that his imperial grandfather was dissolute by nature, but he didn't know that there was a matter of snatching someone's fiancée. But he didn't understand. King of England, what does this have to do with our grand plan? Xiao Su listened to the conversation between the ruler and his minister. At this moment, his expression was somewhat mocking. Your Majesty, don't be anxious. This matter is very important, so important that it can help you get rid of someone. Grandpa Sheng was delighted. Then, King of England, quickly tell me. Xiao Su turned to look at Lao Bai. He remembered that this person had once served the previous emperor. I wonder if Lord Lao has checked the records of Emperor Mingxuan's bedside when he was on the throne. No, Lao Bai answered truthfully. Then do you know the specific date of Prince Jing's birth? Xiao Su asked again. I do. Lao Bai answered, although he was a servant by the previous emperor's side at that time. As a confidant of his master, he had to understand all the situations of his master's competitors. So he not only knew about Prince Jing, but also the specific birth dates of Prince Jin, Prince Zhe, and Prince Ping. Good. Then go to the table and take out the third bedside, record from the right. Find the dates of Consort Zhao's bedside before she was pregnant, Xiao Su ordered. Although Xiao Su wasn't his master, when he spoke, he couldn't help but follow his orders. Lao Bai was shocked. This person had a powerful aura that was even stronger than his Imperial Majesty's. Lao Bai picked up the bedside record and found the one before she was pregnant. But when he flipped through it, he found that the most recent page was missing. He opened the page and found that there were traces of tearing. He was a little confused and brought it to his Imperial Majesty. "Your Majesty, that page is missing." Gentleman Sheng frowned. How could it be missing? After he said that, he remembered Xiao Su's question. Xiao Su wouldn't have brought up the matter of concubines for no reason. He looked at Xiao Su in shock. "Are you suspecting that second uncle isn't my grandfather's son?" When he said that, Lao Bai and the others' faces changed. Xiao Su coldly said, "I didn't say that." Gentleman Sheng immediately turned to ask Lao Bai, "When was second uncle born?" Lao Bai immediately replied, "The 12th of December. The missing bedside record was March. It was September, and he heard that Prince Jing was born prematurely." Hua Ling, who was in charge of investigating this, said, "March's record was lost. I found out that Emperor Ming Xian signed an agreement in March because his territory was taken over by a neighboring country. He was in a bad mood, so he got drunk for 3 or 4 nights. One night, he stayed in Consort Zhao's palace, but whether or not he bedded her was recorded. But coincidentally, I found the midwife of Prince Jing. According to her, Prince Jing wasn't born prematurely. He was born after 10 months of pregnancy." Hua Ling looked at them and continued. "And in February, Consort Xiao asked Emperor Ming Xian for permission to return home to visit her family. At that time, her childhood sweetheart, Sir Lin, also returned to the capital. When he said that, it was undoubtedly a thunderbolt. If Prince Jing was born at full term, but Consort Xiao wasn't in the palace in February, and Consort Xiao claimed that the child was prematurely born, then the record of March's bedside record disappeared." Gentleman Sheng gripped the armrest. He didn't think that such a dirty thing would happen in the imperial family. Imperial concubines in the harem. It was only discovered after 2 generations. And that fake prince was now a vassal king. He had the power to threaten the imperial family. Although Consort Xiao is dead, that Sir Lin is still alive, Xiao Su suddenly said. "Lao Bai, go capture that Sir Lin for me." Gentleman Sheng was furious. "Yes." Lao Bai complied, and when he raised his head, he looked at Xiao Su, who had a calm expression on his face. This person was too frightening. He could uncover such a secret just by relying on a lost bedtime record. He couldn't help but tremble. Chapter 352. If that was true, then second uncle's identity as King Jing would be exposed. He would be removed from the royal family. He would be able to take back his troops, and a big threat would be eliminated. It was as easy as blowing off dust. After the order was given, Jun Zixing looked back at Xiao Su, who was sitting in the chair. Although he knew the man in front of him was wearing a human skin mask and had a very ordinary face, every time he saw him, regardless of whether he was wearing a mask or a disguise, Jun Zixing could not help but want to submit to him. He was shocked by his own thoughts. He immediately discarded the thoughts in his mind and turned to look at Xiao Su with a serious expression, telling him what he thought in his heart. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Su gave him a look of disdain. Embarrassed, he couldn't help but ask, "Then what good idea does Princing have?" Xiao Su thought it was a miracle that a person like that could stay on the throne for so long. "If I were you, I would first collect evidence. With both the witnesses and the evidence, there's no need to fear him escaping. However, I advise your majesty not to act rashly and alert the enemy. Let's wait and see. If you're bitten in the back, the losses will outweigh the gains." Xiao Su also didn't want to be long-winded with him. This person was really too ignorant. Jun Shaosheng realized he had been too reckless. If he had failed to capture second uncle would have said he had wronged him and made up a false accusation against him. That would have put him in an even worse position. He would have given second uncle an excuse to do so. Jun Zixing broke out in a cold sweat. He thought he was being too naive. He took a deep look at Xiao Su. Sure enough, This person had a deep understanding of human nature. His ability to devise strategies and play willful tricks was simply not something he could compare with. "Okay," he immediately said. "I will listen to King of England." After that, Xiao Su gave Jun Zixing a few more pointers. They were all small things that would not attract attention, but Xiao Su was able to find a flaw. After a whole morning, Jun Zixing felt like he had been reborn. He felt like he had been brainwashed. This conversation simply overturned his previous understanding of the politics of the throne. He looked at the person in front of him, who still had an indifferent expression, and couldn't be more surprised. When they fought on the battlefield, he knew that Xiao Su was a rare talent, but he didn't expect that his real talent was not only on the battlefield, but also in politics. It was simply impossible for him to reach Xiao Su's level. "What should I do now?" He did not forget Xiao Su said he wanted to talk to him about a big plan. Xiao Su squinted his eyes. "The plan is starting to take shape, but we still need you to verify the facts before we can proceed." Jun Zixing thought what he said made sense, so he stood up and left to investigate the matter. "Your Majesty, although you have not been in charge of Junlan for long, this prince feels that with the ability of your subordinates, 2 days should be enough to find out the truth." Xiao Su also stood up, but his expression was firm. It was as if he felt that he had given too much in the past 2 days. Jun Zixing gritted his teeth. This person was too harsh. Finding out so many things in 2 days was an impossible task. But looking at his firm expression, he did not want to lose face in front of him. He could only bite the bullet and agree. After Jun Zixing left, Xiao Su slowly sat down. His calm face showed a little tiredness. He put his thumb and index finger on his forehead and closed his eyes slightly, as if he was going to rest. Suddenly, a pair of soft and boneless hands were placed on his shoulders. He froze at first, but after feeling the familiar strength, he relaxed and enjoyed the massage. Turin and Huling had already left to do their work. Because of Xiao Su's request, Jun Zixing did not send any palace servants to serve in the inner hall. They were all standing guard outside the hall. Their main task was to pass on messages or carry things. "Big Ice Cube, you already have a plan. Why don't you tell Jun Zixing?" Chu Qingyan did not feel that there was anything wrong with calling the emperor by his name in the palace. Just now, when he was talking with Jun Zixing, she had been standing at the side door and had not entered. She had heard part of the conversation, but she was curious. Why did the Big Ice Cube tell Jun Zixing so much and have him verify it himself? She remembered that the Big Ice Cube had already collected the evidence, but he had not shown it to Jun Zixing. She was strong, but the strength was moderate. Moreover, he had taught her to recognize all the acupuncture points. With her innate intelligence, she quickly understood how to make a person's meridians flow more smoothly. Xiao Su relaxed his tense brows and said casually, "This prince spent so much effort to collect the evidence. Why should I give it to him? Also, it's better to verify it yourself. That way, it will be more convincing." Chu Qingyan nodded. They had stayed up late last night and worked overtime to sort out the useful information from the mountain of information. They could not let him get away with it for free. "But Big Ice Cube, it doesn't seem like your style to teach him so patiently." Chu Qingyan was curious. "This prince's style? What is this prince's style?" Xiao Su opened his eyes slightly. Although his tone was still indifferent, there was a hint of thought-provoking meaning in it. Chu Qingyan stuck out her tongue behind him. Oh no, she had accidentally said what she was thinking. But what was said was like spilled water. She could not take it back. She could only bite the bullet and reply, "Towards unimportant people, you can ignore them." She felt that her words were asking for a beating, but she felt the body under her hand tremble slightly, as if he was laughing. She was slightly embarrassed. Although Junzi Sheng is a little stupid, he's not hopeless. If he's properly trained, he can still become a useful king. However, the main thing is that I don't want to be pestered by him in the coming days. If I can solve it myself, I won't need to rely on others in the future. Xiao Su withdrew the smile on his face and said indifferently, "I understand." Chu Qingyan poked her head out from behind him. "It's better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish." Not bad. This phrase is used well. Xiao Su reached out and patted her head. But Junzi Sheng shouldn't be as bad as you say. It's just that in front of you, he seems too small. Chu Qingyan added this in her heart. Then she continued, but you gave him 2 days. Is that enough? We had 1 night last night, and he had 2 days. It's enough. Xiao Su disagreed. Chu Qingyan nodded in agreement. Her big ice cube's requirements were higher than others. As the saying went, a strict teacher produces a fine student. Hopefully, this Junzi Sheng would not disappoint. Chapter 353. Knowing that he hadn't had a good rest for the past few nights, Chu Qingyan didn't stop massaging him to soothe him. In fact, she still had some questions in her heart, but she felt that she shouldn't disturb his rest, so she shut her mouth. But before she could speak, Big Ice Block spoke instead. What do you want to ask? Chu Qingyan was slightly surprised. She really suspected that he had eyes on the back of his head. But since Big Ice Block had spoken, she didn't stand on ceremony and asked directly. Big Ice Block, if Gentleman Sheng investigates those things in 2 days, how long will we have to stay in Junlan? It had already taken more than half a month to get here from Sichuan. In a few days, it would be a month. She couldn't feel at ease. Time passed day by day, as if it was cutting her flesh. But she always felt that Big Ice Block didn't take this matter to heart at all. She felt that it was as if the eunuch was more anxious than the emperor. Xiao Su knew what she was worried about. He reached out and patted the little hand on her shoulder. His voice was a little soft. Don't worry, it won't be long. Chu Qingyan sighed softly in her heart. How could such a big mess be solved in just a few days? But since Big Ice Block had spoken, she knew that he wasn't a person who spoke empty words. So she put down her worries for the time being. Chu Qingyan turned to him and asked, after we finish lunch later, can you go to sleep first? She knew that his body had reached its limit. If it hadn't been poisoned, she wouldn't have been too worried about Big Ice Block's body. But it was a critical period recently, and nothing could be done carelessly. Moreover, she had been standing at the side door for so long, but he hadn't noticed her presence. It was enough to see that he was too tired. Her tone was like an adult coaxing a child. Xiao Su smiled. When did his little fellow grow up and do adult things? However, the hope in her eyes made him unable to reject her. Chu Qingyan smiled and immediately asked Xining to bring in the food. Just now, she had already asked Xining to prepare. Big Ice Block didn't like to let the palace servants serve him in the hall, so she sent them all to the kitchen. There was strength in numbers, and the food was quickly prepared. Chu Qingyan attentively put food in his bowl. Looking at the mountain of food in his bowl, she was very satisfied. Big Ice Block used to live in the barracks and had eaten all kinds of food, whether it was wild vegetables, tree bark, or snowy water. He had shared the joys and hardships with the soldiers. This was what she had heard from Turin later. At that time, she was forced to eat carrots by Big Ice Cube. In order to resist, she also gave him carrots, green peppers, chili, and other things that she didn't like to eat. She wanted to see him embarrass himself because he didn't eat them, but she didn't expect that he didn't refuse. He even said that she would eat as much as he wanted. After learning about Big Ice Block's past, she felt a bit more admiration for him and a bit more pity. When she happily put food in his bowl, Huoling's jaw almost fell off and Mu Ling's eyes almost went blind. Because their master was obsessed with cleanliness, a very strong obsession with cleanliness. It was fine in the barracks, but when the conditions allowed it, his food was very expensive, not to mention other people using used chopsticks to put food in his bowl. But Chu Qingyan had done it, and she was sitting there perfectly fine after doing it. Chu Qingyan's strength, or rather her position in their master's heart, was enough to make them look at her in a new light. Moreover, their master seemed to be enjoying it very much. He would occasionally put food in his bowl for the little princess, but of course, it was food that the little princess didn't like to eat. Anyway, on the way here, their knowledge was shattered again and again, and then it was reformed again and again. After eating, Chu Qingyan felt that she had to go out for a walk to help with digestion. There was nothing else to do, so Xiao Su allowed her to make the decision. Walking in the sunny courtyard, after eating and drinking to their heart's content, they felt warm all over. The sun was a bit glaring, but it wasn't very hot. It could only be considered warm. After walking a few steps, Chu Qingyin leaned against a large tree. Xiao Su was standing at her side, and seeing that her cloak was crooked, he straightened it out. At this time, Chu Qingyin seemed to hear the sound of a sword cutting through the air and turned to look at the source of the sound. She saw Jin Xian bathe in the sun as he waved the long sword in his hand. Every move was very serious. It was clearly the middle of winter, but his forehead was covered in fine beads of sweat. It could be seen that he had practiced for a while. Xiao Su followed her gaze and softly said, "I have to admit, you've taken in a pretty good subordinate." It was rare to hear the big ice cube praise her, so Chu Qingyin had a smug look on her face. "That's because I'm a talent scout who can find a fine horse." Xiao Su smiled without saying a word. Chu Qingyin felt that the big ice cube was laughing at her, but she didn't mind. Instead, she turned to look at him with a serious expression. "Big ice cube, thank you. Jin Xian said that you gave him a sword manual. I saw that he seemed to like it very much." Xiao Su patted her head. "That sword manual is just a piece of waste paper to this king. If he thinks it's good, then it's good." He was the one who had taken the initiative to give it to Jin Xian to practice, but now he was acting so aloof. She couldn't help laughing in her heart. She felt that this big ice cube who said one thing and meant another was really cute. "Big ice cube, did you give the sword manual to Jin Xian because you think he's a good seedling?" Chu Qingyin tilted her head to look at him with a bright smile. "It depends on the person." Xiao Su gave an ambiguous answer. Chu Qingyin thought that she had guessed correctly. The big ice cube had recognized Jin Xian's strength. But in Xiao Su's eyes, only the people around her were worthy of his attention. If it was anyone else, no matter how smart or strong they were, he would not put them in his eyes. This was Xiao Su, protecting his own. If he wanted to protect a person, the flowers and plants around her would also receive a bit of grace. After standing in the sun for a while, Chu Qingyin felt that her clothes were a bit hot. She looked up at the person facing her. He didn't have any outstanding facial features, but he always gave off a kind of mesmerizing charm. She tilted her head and thought, could this be the manliness that her roommates always talked about? She couldn't help but laugh when she thought about it. Her laughter clearly alarmed Xiao Su, who was in deep thought. He raised his brows as he looked at her. It seemed like a person who could amuse themselves. Chu Qingyin stopped laughing and looked at the time. She then looked at the big ice cube's red eyes and immediately made a decision. "Big ice cube, let's go back to sleep. I'll tell you a story." Xiao Su nodded without even thinking. When the palace servants who were sweeping the leaves in the yard heard their conversation, they froze in place. Sleep together? This is too bold and unrestrained. This was the imperial palace. Also, that little girl was too young. God, he felt like he didn't understand this world anymore. Chapter 354. Of course, Chu Qingyin doesn't know that her unintentional words have set off a small whirlwind. There are rumors in the palace that the new emperor's guest has a hobby. That is a pedophile. But because that side hall is tightly guarded, no one dares to investigate. Moreover, the palace servant who spread the rumor quickly disappeared from the palace. All the palace servants immediately shut up, and no one mentions this matter again. Chu Qingyin naturally doesn't know what happened afterwards. At this time, she is holding the 36 stratagems that Xiao Su gave her before, flipping through the pages one by one. After seeing the contents of one of the pages, her eyes are filled with joy. "Big ice cube, today I'll tell you a secret plot." Xiao Su expresses that he has no objection. In fact, he is not a child. He doesn't need someone to accompany him, and he doesn't need a bedtime story. However, he doesn't dislike the little fellow taking the initiative to tell him a story. Moreover, he likes the little fellow's voice. It's very clean, unlike the voices he heard in the past. It's almost hard to understand, and he needs to analyze it one by one. Later on, after getting used to it, he can also listen to the speaker's thoughts. If you lose something, you gain something. It's just that this is too tiring. He doesn't want to live like that anymore. The little fellow's voice is already cheerful. He closes his eyes and smiles slightly. In fact, in the little fellow's world, there seems to be nothing to be sad about. When she learns to sing sad songs on the road, she can turn them into her own joyful tune. Aside from being frightened along the way with him, She has always been very strong. This kind of little fellow is also what he wanted to cultivate in the beginning. Contentment brings joy. It's enough. When Chu Qingyan happily finishes telling a story and is about to turn to the next page, she finds that the big ice cube has already fallen asleep. She breathes a sigh of relief, puts the book to the side, and then props up her chin to size him up. The faint green color under his eyes makes her feel a little distressed. Even an omnipotent person can get hurt and can get sick. She reaches out to pull up the quilt to cover his hands, and then tiptoes to the door. Looking back, she sees that he is still sleeping, and then goes out to close the door. This kind of good weather is suitable for sleeping and also suitable for strolling. For the past 2 days, she hadn't gone to see her mother properly. Turning around, she walked towards her parents' room. Chu Qingyan knocks on the door and gets a response from inside. She pushes the door open and goes in. At a glance, she saw her mother lying on the bed. Chu Qingyan immediately walked over and took her mother's hand. She asked with concern, "Mother, are you well?" "Much better." Mrs. Chu smiled and patted her hand. "You were still coughing a few days ago, but you're not coughing anymore today. Kongling's medicine is really effective." Mrs. Chu frowned and said, "Why are your hands so cold? Come and warm them up." Chu Qingyan hurriedly shook her head. No. I still don't want to pass the cold to you. What if you're about to recover and I make it worse?" However, when she saw that her mother's complexion was much rosier than a few days ago, she felt relieved. When Mr. Chu came back, he was very happy to see his daughter. Kai, look at what father has in his hands." Chu Qingyan curiously looked over. Mr. Chu opened his hands and saw a few colorful stones lying in his palms. Chu Qingyan's eyes twitched. "Father, it's so cold. You're going to pick up stones? Aren't you afraid that your fingers will freeze?" Mr. Chu shook his head. "Your bodies are too precious. I'm a man, and I'm not afraid." With that, Mr. Chu sneezed. Chu Qingyan and Mrs. Chu couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Chu touched his nose. This sneeze had exposed him too quickly. "By the way, Kai, where's His Highness?" Mrs. Chu asked. When Mr. Chu heard this, he immediately said, "Yes, where's the scallion? Where is he? I haven't played with him in a long time." Chu Qingyan took her father's hand, then turned to her mother and said, "His Highness hasn't rested much these days because of Junlan. He's already asleep. It's been hard on His Highness." Mrs. Chu nodded. She had more or less heard about what happened in Junlan and felt that the King of England must be under a lot of pressure. She turned to her husband and said, "Yuan, if there's nothing else, don't disturb His Highness. He's very busy." Mr. Chu puffed up his cheeks and could only compromise in the end. "When he's done, I'll ask him to weave a fishing net. I heard that there's a big river in Jiang with a lot of fish in it." Chu Qingyan smiled when she heard this. Her father still hadn't forgotten about the fishing net. It was hard to imagine the big ice cube weaving a net. It should be very fun. Ahem, how could she think like that? With a big ice cube's noble status, how could it be possible that he would weave a net for her father? But why did she subconsciously think that the big ice cube would still do that? She felt that she was really letting her imagination run wild. In order not to disturb her mother's rest, Chu Qingyan chatted a little more and left. Today's sun was really too bright and beautiful. It was much colder than the previous 2 days. When she reached the long corridor, she saw Yin Luo carrying a basin of water from afar. She hid behind a pillar and observed for a while. Then, she stroked her chin and wondered why Sister Yin Luo had entered Ethereal's room. There must be something going on. She smiled maliciously and immediately followed her. She was about to hide by the door and eavesdrop when she was unexpectedly startled by Mu Ling, who had walked up to her. "What are you doing here?" Chu Qingyan asked in a low voice. Mu Ling crossed her arms and retorted, "Shouldn't I be the one asking you that?" Chu Qingyan knew that she was in the wrong. She straightened her body and whispered, "I was curious, so I followed you." She pointed inside. Mu Ling smiled when she heard this. "Ethereal is sick. Miss Chung is taking care of him." Chu Qingyan suddenly understood. No wonder Sister Yin Luo had brought a basin of hot water in. But isn't this called a friend in need is a friend indeed? Mu Ling stroked her chin. Chu Qingyin shook her finger. That's not necessarily true. Every time the two of them gave people the feeling that they were about to reconcile, they would immediately fall out with each other. Therefore, there were some things that couldn't be said too early. Mu Ling nodded in agreement. Many disasters. Then, Mu Ling left because she still had important matters to attend to. Chu Qingyin looked at Mu Ling's departing figure and suddenly felt a little lost. Turin was paying close attention to the movements of the four vassals. Huo Ling was collecting information on the officials of Junlan. Yin Luo was taking care of Ethereal. Her father was taking care of her mother. Jin Xian was practicing martial arts. Xining was preparing dinner. Mu Ling also had something to do. She was the only one who seemed to have nothing to do. Could it be that she was a rice worm who only knew how to eat her fill? Although this was her goal in the past, she had long since abandoned this idea. It seemed that her plan had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. She couldn't let it go on like this. After Chu Qingyin thought it through, she was about to leave when she heard the door behind her open. Chapter 355. Chu Qingyin turned around and saw Yin Luo standing at the door with a basin of water in her hand. She saw a flash of uneasiness on Yin Luo's face. She chuckled and pretended not to know anything. She looked at Yin Luo curiously. "Sister Yin Luo, why are you here?" Chung Yin Luo tightened her grip on the basin. She felt as though she had nowhere to hide. However, when she saw the teasing look in the girl's eyes, Chung Yin Luo's worries dissipated. All that was left was helplessness and anger. Chung Yin Luo was annoyed and amused at the same time. "Come on, you saw it from outside. Tell me, what do you want to know?" She turned around and closed the door. Then, she walked slowly to the side. Chu Qingyin stuck out her tongue and followed her to the kitchen. "Didn't you say that you would ignore him? Why are you in his room?" Chu Qingyin asked even though she already knew the answer. She knew that Yin Luo had a sharp tongue but a soft heart, but she just wanted to pry into her thoughts. Or rather, she wanted Yin Luo to see her true feelings. Chung Yin Luo placed the basin on the stove and crossed her arms. "Can you say that I'm kind-hearted and can't bear to see him fall sick?" Chu Qingyin shrugged. "If you think that saying it will make you feel better, I'll force myself to listen." "You." Chung Yin Luo felt uneasy after being exposed. However, she quickly admitted, "He fell sick mostly because of me. I can't possibly leave him in the lurch and bite the hand that feeds me, right? I can't do such a thing." Chu Qingyin felt that Chung Yin Luo's words were too exaggerated. Chu Qingyin didn't intend to beat around the bush. She got straight to the point and asked, "Then what do you think? Are you really not going to forgive him?" "I don't think so." "How many times have you asked me the same question? Don't you find it annoying?" Chung Yin Luo glared at her fiercely. Chu Qingyin shook her head. "I've hit a sore spot. You're hopping mad." "Huh." Before she could finish laughing, the person in front of her poked her forehead. Chu Qingyin covered her head and looked at her, but she heard her laugh with her hands on her waist. "This is called poking, okay?" Chu Qingyin felt that this was simply too depressing. This person was really good at changing the topic. However, just as she was about to start the second round of questioning, Chung Yin Luo's smile slowly disappeared. Her entire being seemed to be shrouded in loneliness. Chu Qingyin was a little stunned. This was the first time she had seen Ming Yan's disappointed side. At this moment, she said, "Little girl, if an apology could be exchanged for forgiveness, then there wouldn't be so many grudges in this world. If you don't care too much about it, then perhaps you can really not care about other people's apologies and reply that it's fine. But if you can't say it's fine, it's probably because you can't accept it." Chung Yin Luo leaned against the door and crossed her arms. She was no longer as carefree as before. Instead, she seemed to be really cold and couldn't help but hug herself tightly. Her expression was a little dreamy, as though she had sunk into the past. Chu Qingyin closed her mouth. Actually, she didn't know what had happened between the two of them. She had only seen how Ethereal had tried her best to save her and how she had resisted. In her opinion, when the two of them stood together, it could be said that they were a match made in heaven. That was why she had tried her best to matchmake the two of them. However, everything was just her own imagination. She didn't fully understand the past between the two of them. If she didn't prescribe the right medicine, how could it be cured? Or perhaps the gap between the two of them was unbridgeable? Chu Qingyin felt that she had been too idealistic. She didn't understand the two of them in depth at all. She might have made a mistake by trying to matchmake them on her own accord. I'm sorry. Perhaps my good intentions have made things worse. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but lower her head. She felt that it was good, but perhaps to Sister Yin Luo, it was actually a form of embarrassment. Cheng Yin Luo hadn't expected that her words would cause the little girl to blame herself. She suddenly panicked and scratched her head. She didn't know how to comfort her. In the end, she simply held her hand and said in despair, "Little girl, do you want to hear the story between me and him?" Chu Qingyin immediately raised her head and raised her eyebrows. She smiled slyly and said, "Yes, I really want to." The corners of Cheng Yin Luo's mouth stiffened. Why did she have the misconception that she had been deceived? Were you pretending to be weak to win my sympathy? No. Chu Qingyin raised her hand and swore solemnly. Cheng Yin Luo couldn't be bothered to argue with her. Thus, the two of them sat on the stone bench in the courtyard. 10 years ago, my father had just taken over the sect. However, at that time, he was already very famous. Murongju entered the sect at that time and was also my father's first disciple. At that time, I was rebellious and felt that my father's mind was focused on studying medical skills. He didn't care about me and my mother at all, so I resented him. When he asked me if I wanted to study medicine, I actually refused. At that time, Murongju entered the sect. Although he was only 8 or 9 years old, he seemed to be born in an aristocratic family. He was well-mannered and radiated brilliance wherever he went. People couldn't help but approach him. Chu Qingyin looked at her with a gentle expression and a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. Chu Qingyin felt that Yin Luo's gentleness was rare. This was the first time she had heard Yin Luo's evaluation of ethereal. What happened after that? She asked, but I was too arrogant at that time and wanted to compete with him. I also took the initiative to tell my father that I wanted to study medicine. I still haven't forgotten my father's shocked expression when he heard that. It was really funny. He said that he had tried so hard for so many years, but he couldn't compete with an outsider for a month. However, I also became my father's second-last disciple. Later, she found out that it was just because she wanted to have common topics with him. He was like a big brother. He was good at taking care of people and learned medicine quickly. However, the direction of my study was different from his. He made and detoxified poisons, while I practiced medicine to save people. However, this didn't affect our competition. As the sect gradually grew stronger, the number of disciples gradually increased. There was also a lot of gossip in a crowded place. His looks were outstanding, and he was liked by the junior sisters. However, he was a humble person, and he was very tolerant of those women who used the excuse of discussing medical skills to get close to him. I lost to him every time we competed in medical skills, so I always lost to him. However, he tolerated me. Now that I think about it, he was really too good to me back then. Cheng Yin Luo recalled the past and said in a sweet and sentimental tone, "Is that how you fell in love with him?" Chu Qingyin asked, supporting her chin with her hand. It turned out that the relationship between the two of them was like this. She felt that it was quite romantic. Chapter 356. When a talented, intelligent, gentle, and modest young man intrudes into my life, it's too difficult not to be moved at that age. Cheng Yin Luo sighed softly. It's just that I didn't realize my feelings at that time. It was only after an incident that I completely understood what I was chasing in the past. It turned out that it wasn't about winning or losing, but about the way he looked at her. What happened? Chu Qingyin couldn't be more curious after hearing her words. Cheng Yin Luo pursed her lips and smiled. My father is the head of a clan, so he thought that I must have enjoyed special treatment. Moreover, Murongju treated me well, so some people, especially women, were not convinced. One of them tricked me to the back of the mountain and trapped me in a fishing net, unable to move. Unfortunately, the sky turned dark and it started to rain heavily. You should know that the nights in the mountains are very cold. Coupled with the heavy rain, it was extremely cold. How can you still laugh? Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes at Cheng Yinluo. Just as she was engrossed in her story, she actually kept her in suspense. Cheng Yinluo smiled. Just to make me more pitiful. At that time, I was soaking wet, and the thunder was loud, and there were howls of wolves. I thought I was going to die here, and was about to lose all hope. At that moment, I heard someone calling me, so I immediately responded. I didn't expect the person to be him. At that time, he saw her in a sorry state and shivering all over. He immediately untied her and took off his coat to wrap her. Xiaoyan, how are you feeling? His voice was trembling. She thought it was because of the strong wind. Very cold. She bit her lips with a pale face, unable to exert any strength. Bear with it. I'll take you back. Seeing that she couldn't walk anymore, he immediately squatted down and carried her on his back. Then they walked down the mountain step by step. Unfortunately, the rain was too heavy at that time, so heavy that they couldn't open their eyes. The soil was mixed with the water and became loose. He missed a step, and the two of them rolled down the cliff. In order to protect her, he was cut by the mountain rocks several times, but she was safe and sound in his arms. It wasn't easy to get out after falling down the cliff, so they found a safe place to hide from the rain and recuperate. She had a fever during the night. He endured the pain and took care of her for the entire night. When she woke up the next day, her fever had subsided. When she opened her eyes, she turned her head and saw the first ray of sunlight shining on his body, even though he was covered in mud and had fallen from grace. But in her eyes, he was more handsome and gentle than ever. Young Master Qianqian was as gentle as jade. That's probably the case. How romantic! Chu Qingyan's eyes sparkled. That's romantic? Aren't your expectations a little too low? Cheng Yinluo stood up and patted her clothes. She smiled faintly. In this world, there's no such thing as only one person. Let nature take its course. Cheng Yinluo left before she left. That's good too. Chu Qingyan sighed. After Cheng Yinluo's figure disappeared, Chu Qingyan turned around and looked at the person standing under the tall tree. Did you hear what Sister Yinluo said just now? She smiled faintly. He was handsome in a white robe, but his face was very pale. It was obvious that he hadn't recovered from his cold. Yes, he didn't see her when he woke up, so he came to look for her. He didn't expect to hear those words. Those were her heartfelt words that she had never revealed to him. A woman's love, hatred, and resentment for him. And now, she didn't want to persist and let it go. After his shock, only desolation was left in his eyes. I think Sister Yinluo still has feelings for you. You. Before Chu Qingyan could finish, Ethereal turned around. Thank you, young princess. You don't have to waste your time on us in the future. Since she had chosen to let it go, what right did he have to pester her? Chu Qingyan was speechless as she watched his lonely figure slowly leave. Footsteps sounded beside her and stopped beside her. She turned around and hugged him. Big Iceberg, did I do something bad with good intentions again? Chapter 357. Xiao Su stood beside her and placed one hand on her shoulder while the other caressed her head. Why do you say that? She buried her head in his chest and said softly, If I wasn't curious, Sister Yinluo wouldn't have told me about it. If she didn't tell me, Ethereal wouldn't have heard about it. That way, he wouldn't have this feeling of having nothing to live for. You're thinking too much. This has nothing to do with you. He can only blame himself for running around when he's sick. Although Xiao Su hadn't overheard their conversation, he had an extraordinary ability to make deductions. She was slightly taken aback. How could he say that about his subordinates? Big Ice Block was scheming. Xiao Su didn't notice the change in her expression and continued. Besides, my subordinates aren't that weak. Chu Qingyan tightened her arms. She could feel the warmth from the Big Ice Block, who had just woken up. She couldn't help but want to draw more warmth from him. I still feel uneasy, she mumbled. Take care of yourself. Let them deal with their own problems. Xiao Su didn't understand why she was so concerned about other people's affairs. Chu Qingyan didn't like the Big Ice Block's attitude. She raised her head and poked his chest. Big Ice Block, Ethereal's matter is more or less related to you. He left Yinluo because of his responsibility. That's why the two of you acted like strangers when you met today. Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. Are you blaming me? These words were obviously threatening, and Chu Qingyan immediately buried herself in his arms again. No, I'm just stating the facts. Xiao Su chuckled when he saw the woman burrowing into his arms like an ostrich. However, his tone became serious. Qingyan, you have to understand that some things can't be changed because of your status. You have two choices. Do it or don't do it. However, responsibility will make you understand that there are some things that you have to do. When Chu Qingyan heard this, she was slightly taken aback. She clenched her fingers and grabbed his clothes, but her gaze froze. So all these years, Big Ice Cube had been doing what he had to do based on the responsibility on his shoulders? When he was a child, other people would get into trouble and jump up and down, but he would burn the midnight oil to study. When he was young, other people were doted on by their parents, but he led his troops into battle, going through fire and fire. Now, while others were enjoying wealth and glory, he had to face the vermin of the imperial court and be exterminated. Actually, if this responsibility is too heavy, I'd be like Sister Yin Luo. I'd rather you not have it, she said softly. But in this quiet world, his hearing was so good. How could he not hear it? He just pretended not to hear it. She was still young. When she grew up and had more ties, she would understand. I'm hungry. Let's go eat. She let go of his hand and looked at him with her hands behind her back. Her recovery ability had always been stronger than others. Yes, he replied. Big Ice Cube, will it snow in Junlan? No, it's warmer than Sichuan. Then will it snow in Sichuan? Yes, it might already be snowing. Unfortunately, I can't see it. Next year, you'll be able to see it. He blurted out that he would take her to see it next year, but unfortunately, the words stopped at the tip of his tongue. Without the antidote, it was hard to say what would happen in the future. Okay, Chu Qingyan moved closer to him and mischievously blocked the cold wind. Xiao Su didn't argue with her. Instead, he pulled open his cloak and wrapped it around her, blocking the wind for her. Although it didn't snow in Junlan, the cold wind was bone-chilling. After Chu Qingyan and Jun Jiqing returned to the palace, the imperial study was lit up again. Your Majesty, we've caught Wu Qing and his family. Wu Qing passed away last year, but his son and daughter-in-law are still alive, Lao Bai reported with his head bowed. Wu Qing was the former chancellor of the Supreme Court. According to Xiao Su, he was a suspect in the poisoning of Emperor Mingxian. How is it? Jun Zixing paused and looked up at him. Lao Bai sighed softly and said slowly, Your Majesty, the King of England is very accurate. He announced that King Ping was indeed involved in the poisoning of Your Majesty. Wu Qing's son confessed that King Ping instructed their father to do so. He wanted to frame others and get rid of King Ping's suspicions. After their father did this, he used his old age as an excuse to retire and return to his hometown. King Ping even gave them a large sum of money to settle down and guaranteed that they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. After saying that, Lao Bai saw His Majesty's gloomy expression. He handed over a confession. This is the confession of Wu Qing's family members. Jun Zixing took it and skimmed through it. His face was so dark that it could drip water. King Ping is too hateful, so he's just a wolf in a scholar's clothing. He slammed the paper on the table. The humiliation of being deceived surged in his heart. It seemed that King Ping's various gestures of goodwill towards him were all ambitious. It was just to gain his trust and achieve his goal. Your Majesty, please calm down. You don't have to hurt yourself because of such a person. Lao Bai immediately stepped forward to persuade him. Jun Zixing raised his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything else. How are the other matters? We've caught the ringleader of the rumor-mongers. We're interrogating him now, but we haven't gotten any results yet. As for that young Master Lin, we've found his whereabouts, but it'll take some time to bring him back. Jun Zixing nodded. Hurry up. We can't delay any longer. Yes, Lao Bai agreed. He understood how urgent the matter was. It could be said that they were in a race against time. In the afternoon of the second day, Xiao Su and Chu Qingyan sat on the couch and played chess. Hua Ling stood at the side and reported, Master, King Jing and King Jin have formed an alliance. This is a secret letter from the Wind Division. Xiao Su took it. After reading it, he said calmly, "It seems that the two of them can't wait any longer. But this is good too. It'll save us a lot of effort to deal with them." Chu Qingyan took the letter. After reading it, she didn't understand what Big Ice Cube meant. Although she had sorted out the information with them for the whole night and had a good understanding of Junlan, she still didn't understand how Big Ice Cube would help Jun Zixing take back his military power. At this moment, the sound of "Your Majesty has arrived" interrupted Chu Qingyan's train of thought. She turned to look at the person who was holding a chess piece and preparing to play. Counting the time, today was the deadline he gave Jun Zixing. Jun Zixing is here. Chu Qingyan prepared to get off the couch. He has legs. He'll walk in himself, Xiao Su said calmly as he placed his chess piece. Chu Qingyan felt that she wasn't as strong-willed as Big Ice Cube. She obediently got off the couch and stood at the side, waiting for Jun Zixing's arrival. Jun Zixing stepped into the inner hall with Lao Bai. When he saw Xiao Su, his expression relaxed. "King of England, I found out what happened." With that, Jun Zixing asked Lao Bai to hand the information in his hands to Xiao Su. Huoling took the papers and placed them on the table, but Xiao Su didn't reach out to take a look. "Okay, then let's begin." Xiao Su put down his chess piece and said calmly. Chapter 358. When Jun Zixing saw his actions, he immediately understood that Xiao Su already knew about these things. It was just that he wanted to convince Jun Zixing so that he could verify it himself. Otherwise, with Jun Zixing's knowledge, he would never believe the truth of these things. He admired Xiao Su again. This kind of person was really good at playing with people's hearts. He grasped every detail of Jun Zixing's thoughts just right. In fact, Jun Zixing was wrong. Xiao Su just didn't want him to be suspicious and noisy when he was planning. He also didn't like others to criticize him when he was doing things. "Then, Your Majesty, please tell me about the recent movements of these vassal kings," Xiao Su asked. Jun Zixing nodded. "King Jing and King Jin formed an alliance yesterday. I've planted spies around them, but because they're too cautious, this is all the spies could find out. King Jing and King Jin were friends when they were young. However, they valued benefits more now, so it was reasonable for them to form an alliance. King Zhe has recently sent troops to suppress bandits. Instead of suppressing bandits, it's more accurate to say that he wants to move his troops to a town near the capital. It'll be more convenient for him to act then. King Zhe didn't report it and took the initiative to lead troops there. It could be said that he was looking down on the imperial power. However, Jun Zixing couldn't criticize him in these troubled times. It was already very sad that the emperor had to go to this extent. King Ping has been very well behaved recently. He hasn't done anything. No matter how his spies investigated, King Ping was like a cocoon that was wrapped up from head to toe. They couldn't find a single flaw. Although Xiao Su wasn't very satisfied with what Jun Zixing said, not everyone was a subordinate and could investigate everything clearly. He pondered for a moment before saying, "Turin, report to His Majesty the specific information we've gathered recently." "Yes." Turin bowed and said to Jun Zixing, "According to what I've learned, King Jing and King Jin's alliance plan to send assassins into the palace in 7 days. They'll send a large number of troops into the palace in the name of protecting the emperor." The veins on Gentleman Sheng's face bulged. "These two traitors." "Your Majesty, please don't be angry," Turin continued. "Prince A has already sent troops to enter Xiang City and is quietly waiting for Prince Jing and Prince Jing's actions, preparing to follow them." Jun Zixing's expression turned even uglier. "What about King Ping?" Although King Ping is biding his time, there are only 60,000 soldiers left in his fief. The other 60,000 have already disguised themselves and are preparing to sneak into the capital, Turin reported truthfully. Jun Zixing slammed the table. "These people are too audacious. They're simply disgraceful." Chu Qingyan was speechless at Jun Zixing, who only knew how to scold people. Now that all the problems were listed, the key was how to solve them. However, Gentleman Sheng wasn't that weak, and he immediately came back to his senses and said to Xiao Su, "It seems that in 7 days, these people will be in chaos. What should we do?" These people were already on the verge of making a move. As long as one of them made a move, the others wouldn't be able to sit still and wait for changes. No one was willing to fall behind, because this was an important moment. It meant that whoever could rush to that position the fastest would have that position. Manpower was important, but timing was even more important. Moreover, they were in such a situation where they were evenly matched. Junzi Sheng was very worried about the development of the situation. "We can't let them form such a situation. You only have a few 100,000 soldiers under your command, and they have at least 400,000 in total. Therefore, we can't fight them head-on. We can only use our wits." Xiao Su analyzed. "I'd like to hear the details." Junzi Sheng lowered his head slightly and asked, putting down the airs of a ruler. "First, we have to break the alliance between Prince Jing and Prince Jean. It's best to let them fight each other." Xiao Su paused. "I don't think your majesty has forgotten Prince Jing's true identity. We can make use of it now." Junzi Sheng had no clue at first, but when he heard Xiao Su's reminder, he immediately understood. "You're saying that we should let Prince Jean know that Prince Jing doesn't have the blood of the Junlan imperial family flowing in him. Given Prince Jin's insatiable nature, he'll definitely use this opportunity to swallow up Prince Jing's troops. When the time comes, he'll submit a memorial to us. We can't take back Prince Jing's military powers so quickly, so we'll have to let him temporarily control it. But won't that benefit Prince Jean in the end?" Xiao Su raised his brows and glanced at him. "Did I say that Prince Jean would definitely survive?" Swords had no eyes. When two people fought, it wasn't impossible for both sides to suffer heavy losses. Junzi Sheng immediately gave him a thumbs up. "Then, these 200,000 soldiers will return to our hands. It's quite simple, but as for the specifics, this prince's subordinates will assist your majesty in arranging people to do it," Xiao Su said calmly. "Good. We were worried at first, but with your words, we can rest assured." A smile appeared on Junzi Sheng's face. "Then 7 days later, we'll be able to get rid of these two major problems." "No, 7 days is too long. We'll bring it forward to 3 days." "But didn't they arrange for assassins to kidnap us? If we bring it forward, won't we be alerting them?" Jun Zixing was worried that Prince Zhe and Prince Ping wouldn't make a move after receiving the news. When the time came, there would be even more uncertainties. Chu Qingyan immediately knew that Junzi Sheng wanted to take advantage of the 7 days later to get rid of these 4 people in one fell swoop. His appetite was too big. Be careful that a man whose heart is not content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Xiao Su didn't take Junzi Sheng's worries to heart. 7 days later, the imperial family will perform a ritual. They originally planned to make a move on that day, but as the astrology bureau said, that day is inauspicious, so it's not impossible to bring it forward. Huo Ling added, and this subordinate has already found the hiding place of those assassins. When the time comes, as long as we capture them and have our own people impersonate them, your Majesty's life won't be in any danger. As soon as Huo Ling finished speaking, Chu Qingyan immediately understood the big ice cube's plan. It was to bring forward the ritual so that Prince Jing and Prince Jean would order the assassins to carry out the assassination in advance. The 2 allied armies would quickly rush to the capital. On the way, they would deliberately reveal Prince Jing's identity to Prince Jean. When internal strife arose, the two would kill each other. Then, they would let the assassins die silently and bear the blame themselves. As for Prince Zhe and Prince Ping, because they heard the news of the rescue mission, they wouldn't know what happened between Prince Jing and Prince Jean in a short period of time. They would only focus on fighting for the throne and see who would arrive at the capital first. The plan was perfect, but they couldn't make a single mistake. Chu Qingyan understood, and as the emperor, Junzi Sheng understood even more. What a brilliant plan! Junzi Sheng couldn't help but praise. Xiao Su lowered his head and sipped his tea, ignoring Junzi Sheng's praise. After Junzi Sheng understood the plan, he still couldn't figure it out. Prince Zhe is naturally suspicious, and Prince Ping hides his abilities. How should we deal with them? Chapter 359. Xiao Su used the teapot lid to gently stir the tea leaves floating on the surface of the water. His tone was calm. King Ping is naturally suspicious, so we can take advantage of him. King Ping is cautious. If he knows that King Jing and King Jean have been defeated, he'll stake everything on a single throw. You'll have to deal with everything at once. Xiao Su didn't say much, but Gentleman Sheng could hear his calmness. Since Xiao Su had spoken, it meant that he already had a plan. He chose to believe him. About the rumors about you killing your brothers and harming your sisters, now that we know who's behind it, we can turn the tables and let the public's opinion shift to someone else. You can also build your image as the ruler of a country, Xiao Su reminded him. Gentleman Sheng nodded. Although this matter wasn't very serious and was just a rumor, the public's opinion could make or break a person. If he could use this opportunity to clear himself of suspicion, why not? If it was settled before Zhe Wang mobilized his troops, when Zhe Wang invaded, the people would also have a conflicted mentality. When he was arrested, no one would say that he was looking for Zhe Wang as a scapegoat and randomly splashing dirty water on him. After Gentleman Sheng thought it through, he couldn't help but be surprised again. Details determined success or failure. Xiao Su's every move wasn't useless. Every move he made was very delicate. It seemed like the pieces were scattered all over the chessboard, but as long as the last piece was placed, all the pieces would come to life. Your Majesty, I can't guarantee that nothing will go wrong. I can only say that I'll do my best. Xiao Su looked at him and said slowly, Understand, there's no such thing as an invincible general on the battlefield. If such a meticulous plan can't save Junlan, I'll accept it. Gentleman Sheng smiled and sighed. Xiao Su didn't say anything. He only ordered Turin and Huoling to do what they should do next. After everything was done, Xiao Su let Turin and Huoling leave with Gentleman Sheng. Thank you, King of England. If there's anything else, I'll take my leave. Gentleman Sheng said with a smile. Your Majesty, Xiao Su suddenly said. Gentleman Sheng turned to look at him in confusion. Is there anything that hasn't been resolved? No, Xiao Su shook his head and said seriously, Your Majesty, don't worry too much. I just hope that you can remember your promise. Gentleman Sheng couldn't help but laugh. A gentleman's promise is worth 1,000 pieces of gold. I won't forget it. Even if I lose, I'll send you to the border of Jiang Kingdom unharmed. However, since Xiao Su had said so, it proved that this mess could still be cleaned up. Junzi Sheng came with a stomach full of worries, but when he left, the burden on his shoulders was much lighter, and his footsteps were full of vigor. After the group of people left, the entire crowded hall suddenly became empty. Come. Stop. If it's just a compliment, then forget it. Xiao Su laughed and shook his head. Big Ice Cube, I really think that you're amazing. It turns out that those things were just a prelude. One by one, they became a chain of plans. How can a person be so smart? Chu Qingyan couldn't help but praise him. Listening to you is better than reading books for 10 years. Today, she had witnessed a series of plans, which had completely overturned all her previous knowledge. It turned out that the plots in novels really existed and weren't imagined by those authors. However, she didn't mean that Big Ice Cube was insidious. There was no right or wrong in the fight for power. Xiao Su glanced at her coldly. You can read more and experience more, but it depends on your talent. Chu Qingyan felt like she had been stabbed by an arrow by Big Ice Cube. However, she still had something to ask him, so she didn't care about the belittling in his words. Big Ice Cube, since Prince Jing and Prince Jean have decided to take action in 7 days, why did you bring it forward? Aren't you afraid that Prince Jing and Prince Jean will be suspicious? Xiao Su looked down at her. I didn't expect that you would be enlightened one day. Ignoring the fire in her eyes, Xiao Su curved his lips. Didn't you want to leave Junlan and go to Jiang country? If you continue to lose sleep, you'll really become a panda. Chu Qingyan frowned. She had accidentally mentioned the panda to him, but what did Big Ice Cube say have to do with bringing it forward? However, after Big Ice Cube said this, he calmly picked up his teacup and drank tea. Obviously, he didn't want to discuss this issue with her anymore. That proved that his words were the answer. Suddenly, there was a flash of light. Chu Qingyin had an epiphany. Big Ice Cube was saying that he wanted to bring the plan forward to appease her. The sooner they succeeded, the sooner they could leave Junlan. She stole a glance at the calm person and felt a warmth in her heart. Big Ice Cube was taking such a big risk for her. She was slightly moved. But won't this risk be great? She was still worried. There are pros and cons. At least it will bring forward the Four Kings' plans, so they won't have so much time to react. It will also prevent unforeseen events. Moreover, Prince Jing and Prince Jing are both very conceited. If there are no accidents, they won't doubt their own plan, Xiao Su replied. Chu Qingyan nodded. By the time they reacted, the situation was already clear. They had to bite the bullet and do it. If Junlan was passively waiting for the Four Kings to attack before this time, it was better to say that Junlan was actively waiting for the Four Kings' actions. Big Ice Cube. If the plan goes smoothly and Prince Jing and Prince Jin's forces are taken back, what do you plan to do with Prince Ping and Prince Zhe? Junzi Sheng also asked him this question. She didn't get an answer, but she was still curious. According to the information collected by Huo Ling, Prince Ping and Prince Zhe were the two most difficult to deal with among the Four Kings. Xiao Su rubbed his eyebrows. He felt that this little fellow had a lot of questions, but he didn't answer her like he did Junzi Sheng. Prince Zhe is cunning and suspicious, but he is also timid. Once someone fails, he will probably be overcautious. Moreover, his most doted son is already under the control of the Wind sect. When the time comes, we can just subdue him. Chu Qingyan gasped. Since when did the Big Ice Cube capture someone's family? What's more, he was able to do it so quietly. He was simply too powerful. Everyone has a weakness. As long as you grasp their weakness, you can break them without attacking. Xiao Su looked at her mouth, which was wide enough to stuff an egg in, and added another sentence. Chu Qingyan nodded repeatedly. Big Ice Cube was really an expert in scheming. She couldn't help but admire him. Then what about Prince Ping? Chu Qingyan stopped exclaiming and asked with her head tilted. You're asking too many questions. It's time to eat. Xiao Su stood up and ignored her. Chu Qingyan was depressed. Would it kill him to ask so many questions? It was very ungentlemanly of him to keep her in suspense. Chapter 360. Unfortunately, no matter how she tried to coax information out of him at the dining table, Big Ice Cube remained indifferent to her. In the end, he even said that he didn't talk during the meal, which left her speechless. Her desire to know was quickly extinguished. She comforted herself. In any case, she would find out soon, so why bother asking him? Perhaps it was because Chu Qingyan had stopped bothering him, but Xiao Su wasn't used to it. You're not going to ask? He put down his chopsticks and looked at her. I don't talk during the meal. She harumphed coldly. You don't want to know? He raised his brows. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Chu Qingyan stuffed a big mouthful of rice in her mouth and ignored him. Xiao Su nodded. I didn't intend to tell you anyway. PFFF. Chu Qingyan looked at the table full of rice and suddenly had the urge to go crazy. As for the culprit, he had already stood up and left a sentence. This king is full. Then he left. Chu Qingyan clenched her chopsticks so tightly that they made crunching sounds. Xining was trembling with fear as she asked, Master, are you all right? I'm very good, very good. Chu Qingyan took another big mouthful of rice and couldn't eat anymore. I'm full too. Chu Qingyan put down her bowl and chopsticks and got up to leave. Xining looked at the table full of food and muttered in her heart, Master must be full from anger. However, Xining also felt a little strange at this moment. It seemed that His Highness liked to tease Master recently, and every time, it was Master who was so angry that she stomped her feet. Sigh, there was always someone to defeat someone else. Xining shook her head as she tidied up. In any case, it was fine as long as His Highness and Master got along well. But it would be great if Jinxin could talk more like this. He was always so cold and aloof. And what was she thinking about? She immediately patted her cheeks to wake herself up. At the same time, Chung Yinluo brought the dishes into Ethereal's room. "Let's eat first," she called out to him. She knew that his high fever had already subsided to a normal temperature. There was no movement behind her, so she turned around to look at him after setting the table. However, she saw him looking at her deeply. It was as if he was looking at her, but also as if he was looking at something through her. Ever since they had reunited, she had rarely seen him like this. Chung Yinluo thought that his high fever had damaged his brain. She walked over and placed her hand on his forehead to check if he was burning up again. But as soon as she stretched out her hand before she could touch his forehead, he dodged it. Chung Yinluo was taken aback. The atmosphere instantly turned awkward. Ethereal had only done it subconsciously. Seeing her withdraw her hand with an unnatural expression, she immediately regretted it. "Xiaoyan, I'm fine now. Let's eat." He lifted the blanket and got up. Then, he walked to the dining table. Chung Yinluo had wanted to have a meal with him, but she felt that it was too awkward. She thought about it and decided not to. "I've already eaten. Take your time. I'll come and clean up later." She smiled and was about to turn around and leave. "Xiaoyan," Ethereal suddenly called out. She stopped in her tracks and turned around to look at him. His head was slightly lowered, so she couldn't see his expression clearly. However, she didn't know why her heart ached. "What's the matter?" she asked in a low voice. "I'm fine. You don't have to take care of me anymore. Thank you." With that, he picked up his chopsticks and started eating. His distant and polite words made her feel as if they had returned to the time when they had first met. He was so polite to everyone, but there was also a sense of distance. "Okay, you're welcome." It took her a lot of effort to find her voice again. Then, she pushed the door open and left. The person who had been eating calmly just now slowly put down his chopsticks and covered his eyes. "I'm sorry, Xiaoyan. If I'm your burden, then I won't restrain you anymore. The man that Master will introduce to you will definitely be better than me. Perhaps he won't love you as much as I do, but you won't have to wait for someone in fear anymore. A man who can't promise you or give you a sense of security is better off leaving as soon as possible. If there's someone you like, then you should just marry him. I'm a person who walks on the edge of a knife. I don't deserve your sincere devotion. I'll let you go like I did in the past. Indeed, there's no one in this world who can't be together. However, I'm afraid that I won't be able to meet a good girl like you again." The night darkened, whose silhouette was more lonely than the night. Chung Yinluo left the room and quickly walked back to her room. She turned around and closed the door, then pressed her entire body against the door. She was in a daze, as if something had been cut open and dug out. Had she really reached the end this time? Chung Yinluo stretched out her hand and looked at the marriage line. When she was young, her father had asked a good friend to read her fortune. The fortune said that the road to love would be bumpy, but in the end, it would be blissful. The bumpy road was with him. The blissful road to bliss was with someone else. Her heart was in a mess. She should have heaved a sigh of relief and ended things with him. Why did she feel even more perplexed? Inadvertently, a drop of water fell. She was slightly surprised, and her vision gradually blurred. She raised her hand to cover her eyes and slowly squatted down. She suppressed her voice and cried like a child. It was already late at night. When Chu Qingyan passed by Chung Yinluo's room, she realized that there was no light at all. She couldn't help but feel curious and knocked on the door. No one answered, so she tried to push the door. Unexpectedly, the door opened. However, when she pushed the door open, the candle inside lit up. The light made her a little dazzled. She rubbed her eyes and asked, "Sister Yinluo, what are you doing in the room? Why didn't you light the candle?" "I accidentally fell asleep just now." Chung Yinluo placed the candle on the table and looked indifferent. Chu Qingyan's sharp ears could hear the hoarseness in her voice, but she wisely chose not to ask. "Oh, I see. Have you eaten?" "I don't want to eat. I want to drink." "Little girl, go and get me a few jars of wine." Chung Yinluo looked at her with a mischievous smile. Chu Qingyan touched her nose. Something was wrong, but a few jars of wine? Her alcohol tolerance was too good. However, seeing that she was in a bad mood, Chu Qingyin didn't argue with her. She turned around and ordered the palace servants to prepare the wine. On the roof, Chu Qingyin gathered her cloak. Fortunately, Big Ice Cube had draped it over her before she left. Otherwise, she would have been frozen stiff tonight. The people in the palace were all discerning. When they heard that she wanted wine, they immediately and attentively prepared a few side dishes. At this moment, she turned to look at the person beside her, who picked up a jar of wine and poured it into her mouth. She was a little worried. Drink slowly. No one is going to snatch it from you. Aren't you drinking? Cheng Yinluo shook the wine jar in front of her. Chu Qingyin shook her head. If Big Ice Cube smells the wine when I go back, I'll probably be scolded. No, she would definitely be scolded. Your Big Ice Cube is like an old mother. Oh yes, you too. It's not good to be too obedient. You'll be eaten alive in the future, Cheng Yinluo said with a smile. She had drunk some wine and didn't feel restrained. However, Chu Qingyin's face stiffened when she heard her words. Chapter 361. What the hell? What was she talking about? Did she know how to chat? Chu Qingyin was a little annoyed as she glared at the person who was drinking happily. However, she quickly realized that something was wrong. Sister Yinluo, are you sad? There seemed to be some suspicious traces of tears at the corners of her eyes. Her eyes reflected the light from the lanterns, and she could vaguely see that they were red. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but ask in a soft voice. Cheng Yinluo couldn't help but laugh, as if she had heard something funny. I'm not sad. On the contrary, I'm very happy. Happy? Chu Qingyin felt that she didn't seem to be happy at all. Yes, I'm happy that I've finally gotten rid of a future that I can't see. It's a love that doesn't have a present. It's a love that ended without a cause. After she finished speaking, she took a sip of wine. The wine flowed down from the corner of her mouth, glistening under the nightlight. Chu Qingyin also noticed the tears that flowed down from the corners of her eyes. Chu Qingyin gritted her teeth. She felt a little sad, but she didn't know what had happened between Cheng Yinluo and Ethereal. She could only persuade her. Don't drink too much. It's cold, and it's not good for your health. Cheng Yinluo slowly put down the wine jar and wiped her lips with her sleeve. Her red lips, which were already stained with water and were glowing, became even redder after she wiped them with force. They were like roses that bloomed in the night, bright and gorgeous. Her red cheeks were so delicate that they looked like they could be broken by the wind. Against the pitch-black night sky behind her, her fair skin was tinged with rosy red. Any man who saw this scene would be fascinated. Chu Qingyin wanted to take a bite of her lips as if they were honey peaches. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a celebration. Cheng Yinluo smiled insincerely. She hugged the wine jar, but her expression was ethereal. Chu Qingyin felt for a chicken claw and stuffed it into her mouth. She crunched on it. Oh, then drink more. Enjoy yourself. Since she couldn't persuade her, she would just let her continue drinking. Once she was drunk, she would be able to sleep soundly. As soon as Chu Qingyin finished speaking, Cheng Yinluo stopped pouring the wine. She tilted her head and said to Chu Qingyin, "Little girl, don't we always have talents to liven things up when we drink? Give me a performance." This was a classic example of a fire at the city gate bringing disaster to the fish in the moat. Chu Qingyin spat out a bone and spread out her hands. What do you want to hear? As long as it's suitable for the occasion. Cheng Yinluo tapped the edge of the wine jar and said with a smile. She was extremely flirtatious and full of smiles. She was like a beautiful flower, naturally seductive. Chu Qingyin looked at the person in front of her who was leaning on the wine jar and smiling at her. She couldn't help but sigh. What a beautiful woman. What a pity. Okay, let me think about it. Chu Qingyin didn't want a drunk person to mess around, but she still agreed. Sing as you please. If you sing well, I'll reward you, Cheng Yinluo said with a smile. Then I'll sing a song that I used to like very much. Chu Qingyin recalled a television series that she used to be obsessed with. The song in the series had always touched her deeply. She hummed softly, "Don't let me be afraid to think about the silent past," and the regret of trying to collect it. I don't want to be brave now. I don't want to be too strong. I want to love its old and worn appearance. The moment Chu Qingyin opened her mouth, Chung Yin-luo felt that something was amiss. The lyrics sounded a little sad. She wanted to interrupt her and change the song, but she didn't say anything. I feel too lonely. I'm in a place where you're not. Although the sky is blue, my heart is cold. I'm too lonely. You're somewhere else. Happiness isn't as simple as it seems. The song sounded a little sad. Chu Qingyin sang it softly a few times. When she turned her head to look at the person beside her, she realized that she had buried her head in her arms. Her shoulders seemed to be trembling. Chu Qingyin suddenly felt that she had chosen the wrong song. Sister Yinluo, I think that this song suits the situation. I was wrong. I'll change it for you. Don't cry. After a while, the person lifted her head and stared at her with watery eyes. Who said that? Sing got into my eyes. Okay. Sing got into your eyes. Let me blow on it for you. Chu Qingyin pretended to help her, but she pushed her away. Forget it. Lend me your shoulder. I'm tired. Chung Yinluo leaned her head on her shoulder in a domineering manner. Chu Qingyin rubbed her nose. Did drunk people like to lie? Were they prideful and domineering? After a while, she heard her even breathing. Chu Qingyin sighed softly. What was going on? One was drowning her sorrows in alcohol, while the other was probably having a hard time sleeping. Speaking of the devil, he arrived. Ethereal appeared on the rooftop, his body cold and frosty. Why are you here? Chu Qingyin lifted her head and looked at him in surprise. I heard from Xining that you were admiring the moon on the rooftop, so I came up to take a look. Ethereal's gaze landed on Chung Yinluo. There was a hint of pity in his eyes. I'll return the person drowning her sorrows in alcohol. Chu Qingyin pointed at the person on her shoulder. Ethereal nodded. Without another word, he reached out and scooped her up. Then, he quickly disappeared from the rooftop. Chu Qingyin looked at the empty rooftop and smiled. Sigh. I'm the only one left now. It's a lonely, cold night. Should I have some wine to warm myself up? She muttered to herself. She didn't really intend to drink. She didn't want to wake up with a splitting headache tomorrow. Unfortunately, someone took her words seriously. You want a drink? A cold voice sounded beside her ear. Chu Qingyin was startled. She stiffened her neck and turned to look. Wasn't that person in a black brocade robe big, Ice Cube? I was just saying. Chu Qingyin immediately raised her hands in surrender. Xiao Su snorted coldly, but didn't pursue the matter. Instead of sleeping in the middle of the night, you're wailing like a ghost and howling like a wolf. Very good, very good. Chu Qingyin shrank her neck when she heard the word very good twice in a row. I'm keeping someone company. Xiao Su didn't want to hear her explanation. He looked at her coldly. Aren't you going to get up? Are you going to sit here all night? Big Ice Cube was so fierce tonight. Chu Qingyin's eyes crinkled. She looked embarrassed. I'm numb from the cold. Xiao Su's eyes twitched. Without hesitation, he bent down and scooped her up. Hold on tight. Okay. Chu Qingyin obediently hugged his neck and closed her eyes. She could only hear the cold wind blowing in her ears. After a moment of dizziness, she landed on the ground. She thought that Big Ice Cube would put her down, but she never thought that he would directly carry her into her room. Did you forget what this king said to you? He placed her on the bed and stood with his hands behind his back. Chu Qingyin consciously pulled the blanket over herself. You're not allowed to go out in the middle of the night. This king thought you forgot. Xiao Su's voice carried a trace of mockery. Chu Qingyin knew that she was in the wrong, so she reached out to tug at his sleeve. I was wrong. There won't be a next time. You still want next time? His threatening tone was heavy. She immediately shook her head. No, sleep, Xiao Su coldly ordered. Chu Qingyin shrank back. You're not going to tell me stories? Not today. Stingy. Chu Qingyin muttered in her heart. Chapter 362. Xiao Su watched her close her eyes before he turned around and left, closing the door behind him. He did not have time to accompany the little girl tonight. He had to pay close attention to the movements of the vassals in Junlan. Gentleman Sheng ordered the sacrificial ceremony to be brought forward. Although there were some objections among the officials, they could only carry out the order since the emperor had spoken. Once Gentleman Sheng gave the order, the vassals began to move. Prince Jing and Prince Jean discussed throughout the night. Second brother, What do you think of this matter? Prince Jing asked straightforwardly as soon as he arrived at the meeting place. Prince Jing stroked his beard with a disapproving expression. According to the spies, the astrology bureau divined that there will be heavy rain in 7 days. It's not auspicious, so the sacrificial ceremony has been brought forward to 3 days later. You don't have to make a fuss. Prince Jing thought about it and felt that his second brother was right. He nodded and said, "Since you've already found out, I'm relieved. So, shall we bring forward the assassination plan?" "Of course. Only the time has changed, but everything else is the same. We can move forward too," Prince Jing said with a smile. "The new emperor has just taken over the court. How can he have extra energy to guard against us? Don't worry, third brother. Once we take over the country, we'll share the glory of this golden age." Prince Jing smiled slyly. "I'm relieved to hear that, second brother. When we reach the capital, I'm afraid that fourth brother and fifth brother won't even have time to react. When we take over the capital, we'll join forces and destroy them. Then we'll have nothing to worry about. Third brother, you're right. Come, let's toast to our bright future." Prince Jing raised his wine cup and laughed heartily. Prince Jing raised his cup. All right, for the sake of the plan in 3 days, the two of them did not drink too much. After discussing the details, the two of them parted ways. After sending off Prince Jing's carriage, Prince Jing planned to return to his residence to rest. Suddenly, someone came to visit him. He did not want to pay attention to it, but the attendant said that it was Lord Li. Prince Jing thought about it and summoned him. Lida was his trusted official. Something important must have happened for him to visit him so late at night. Lida rushed in. As soon as he saw Prince Jing, he immediately said, "Lord, this humble subject has received a shocking piece of news." After saying that, he whispered into Prince Jing's ear. Hearing this, Prince Jing was shocked. "Is that true? This humble subject has already confirmed it, and the culprit has been caught. Lord, what do you think we should do?" Lida couldn't make up his mind. The moment he stepped into the house today, he received this news. Prince Jing was actually not His Majesty Ming Xian's biological child. He was actually born from concubine Xiao Shu's illicit affair with another man. This was a huge matter because their lord was currently working with Prince Jing. That's good. This king didn't want to cooperate with him, so as to avoid being bitten by him. Now this news has given this king a very good reason to completely withdraw his troops. Ha ha ha! The heavens are helping me. Prince Jing laughed heartily. He had long had enough of his second son's arrogant personality. He had originally planned to secretly deal with him after seizing the throne, but now that he had evidence in his hands, even if he killed him, when the time came, he would be able to take out the evidence, and it would be reasonable. Hence, Prince Jing immediately instructed Lida in a low voice. After hearing this, Lida praised repeatedly. "Lord, this is a good plan. Not only can you get rid of Prince Jing, but you can also take all of his troops under your command. This is like adding wings to a tiger." Prince Jing smiled proudly. "My second son has always been superior to this king. Now this king will let him have a taste of being stepped on." Lida agreed. "How can Prince Jing compare to you, Lord? Go, do as I say." Yes. The night was dark and the wind was strong. It was the perfect time to kill and rob. Outside a hidden courtyard in Junlin's capital, Turin led dozens of people into it in the dark. At this moment, the men in black inside were sleeping soundly. No one had expected an assassination attempt to occur so suddenly. The other party was not on guard, and they were quickly dealt with one by one. Change into their clothes. Turin looked at the corpses on the ground. His expression did not change as he immediately gave the order. These people were the assassins that Prince Jing and Prince Jing had arranged to assassinate Gentleman Sheng in 3 days. Yes, soon, the courtyard was cleaned up. No one would be able to tell that there had been a cruel battle here just now. Not long after, a subordinate reported with a letter. "This is a secret letter from Prince Jing." Turin took it and glanced at it. "Master's right. Prince Jing has brought forward the assassination time. We'll beat him at his own game. Send this message to Master." "Yes, Master." Xiao Lai accepted the order and retreated. 3 days later, Gentleman Sheng went to Tianlan Temple to offer sacrifices accompanied by hundreds of officials. When the ceremony was halfway through, the assassins in black suddenly appeared and took Gentleman Sheng to the palace. Gentleman Sheng sealed the palace and did not allow anyone to enter. King Jin had used his identity as King Jing to threaten King Jing in a town that he was unwilling to leave. When King Jing retaliated, King Jin had surrounded King Jing with the troops that he had arranged beforehand and killed him. After Prince Jing's death, Prince Jin took his military order and planned to command Prince Jing's 3 armies. Unfortunately, he was killed in his room by Huoling before he could hold the order. Huoling glanced at Prince Jin on the ground and said to the people behind him, "Spread the news that Prince Jing was killed by Prince Jin." In order to take revenge, Prince Jing's remaining forces sneaked into Prince Jin's room and killed him. "Yes, master." Xiao Lai accepted the order. Huoling looked at the 2 military orders in his hand and smiled mysteriously. This happened on the day Gentleman Sheng was kidnapped. Therefore, Huoling sent people to block the news about Prince Jing and Prince Jin. The matter was quickly covered up. The outside world trembled in fear because the new emperor was kidnapped. Meetings were held one after another, trying to rescue the new emperor before he was hurt. But strangely, the assassins did not do anything else after taking Gentleman Sheng into the palace. However, if anyone wanted to sneak into the palace, they would be caught and thrown out. The civil and military officials were even more afraid of this group of assassins. They did not dare to act rashly. While everyone was busy outside, the side chamber was leisurely and leisurely. Gentleman Sheng was drinking tea and eating desserts. His expression was relaxed as he lamented, "We haven't been so free in a long time." Chu Qingyan was lying on the table when she heard him say this. She couldn't help but glance at him. This emperor was indeed very busy. It was more relaxing to be an unemployed person. Xiao Su looked at Gentleman Sheng coldly. "Does your majesty think you're free just because you're like this? What does the King of England think?" Gentleman Sheng hesitated and couldn't help but ask, "Isn't this the best time to distinguish between the loyal officials and the traitorous ones?" Xiao Su said indifferently. Gentleman Sheng finally reacted and patted his head. "The King of England is right. How can we miss this opportunity?" Chu Qingyan felt that Gentleman Sheng had been tormented by state affairs until he became stupid. At this time, Turin walked in quickly. Chapter 363. "What's the matter?" Xiao Su asked as soon as Turin entered the room. Turin bowed to Junzi Sheng before turning to his master. Huoling has successfully taken down King Jing and King Jin's armies. Their forces are now gathered in Yi City, which is not far from the capital. Hearing this, Gentleman Sheng clapped his hands and laughed. "That's great. 2 of our biggest problems have been dealt with. King Ying's foresight is truly divine." Xiao Su ignored his compliment. "Your Majesty, let the 2 armies stand still for now. Find a general you can trust to integrate them into your own army." Junzi Sheng understood what he meant. Now that the 2 armies were mixed together, there were many people who were dissatisfied or wantonly trying to sow discord. At this moment, other than appeasing them, Junzi Sheng also had to make them submit willingly. Junzi Sheng thought for a moment and ordered Lao Bai to do the job. Within 2 days, Xiao Su dealt with all the messengers who came and went. Xiao Su's decisiveness won Junzi Sheng's admiration. Back then, Junzi Sheng was just standing on one side of the battlefield and could only see the results of Xiao Su's orders. Now that he was in the same situation, he realized that Xiao Su was a man of strategy. He was so calm that he had the power to decide life and death. "King of England, if it weren't for you, I would have become a prisoner by now." Junzi Sheng sighed. His royal uncles were all cunning old foxes. He was no match for them at all. "Your Majesty, it's too early to be happy. Your final opponent is really coming." As soon as Xiao Su finished speaking, Turin entered the hall again. "Master, King Zhe has brought his army to Fu City in the name of protecting the emperor," Turin reported. "Fu City?" Junzi Sheng was shocked. "Doesn't that mean they've reached the capital?" Turin nodded. "How many soldiers does King Zhe have with him?" Xiao Su was very calm. There was no sign of panic. 10,000 cavalry and 70,000 infantry, Turin replied. Xiao nodded and then turned to say to Jun Zixing, Your Majesty can send an official representing your status to negotiate with Zhe Wang and use the chips in your hand to make a deal with him. That's right. Prince Zhe's favored son is in our hands. Moreover, Prince Zhe dared to send troops because he was relying on the name of protecting the emperor. If we were fine, and Prince Jin and Prince Jing had already fallen from power, he probably wouldn't have the guts to go against the capital. Immediately, Gentleman Sheng calmed down. He had 3 times as many soldiers as Zhe King, including the hundreds of thousands of soldiers he had subdued. Even if King Zhe doesn't agree, our men are more than enough to beat him back. Gentleman Sheng was a little carried away. Xiao shook his head. Let's not touch Prince Jing and Prince Jin's men for now. Before they've completely surrendered, they're useless. Instead of being of any use, he was worried that they would be instigated. It's best to persuade Prince Zhe to surrender. Gentleman Sheng was stunned. He felt that Xiao words made sense, so he sent someone to deal with this matter. However, before that, he said with some hesitation, King of England, can I borrow an expert negotiator from you? The people I have aren't outstanding enough. I'm afraid they'll mess things up. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but shake her head when she heard this. She really didn't know how this Gentleman Sheng became an emperor. He didn't have anyone, and his ability was lacking. Fortunately, this time, he met her big ice cube. Otherwise, with his ability, the entire Junlan would have been divided up. Turin, arrange someone for him. Xiao didn't care about this small matter and assigned someone to him. Only then did Gentleman Sheng heave a sigh of relief. Night fell. The side hall was still brightly lit, as if it was daytime. Gentleman Sheng had already gone back to rest. Chu Qingyan walked in with a bowl of soup. Big ice cube, it's very late. Drink something to fill your stomach. She handed the bowl to him. Xiao took it and glanced at her. In the future, it's so late. You don't have to do these things. Just instruct the servants to do it. She knew that the big ice cube was concerned about her. She shrugged and smiled nonchalantly. Anyway, you're all busy. I don't have much to do. I can still help if it's within my ability. When Xiao heard this, he handed the secret letter in his hand to her. Then read this letter for me. Chu Qingyan was speechless at the way he gave her orders so easily. However, she still took it and read it without much thought. At noon, King Ping led his troops and camped in Mount Pan 30 miles away. He's already suspicious of the rescue mission. When she read this, Chu Qingyan's attention was immediately drawn. She murmured, Big ice cube. If King Ping finds out that all this is fake, will he do something desperate? Xiao put down the bowl and shook his head. No, King Ping is cautious and cherishes his reputation. He won't be impulsive and take the risk to send his troops. Then what will he do? After all, 2 out of the 4 kings have already been killed. Chu Qingyan was very curious. This situation seemed to be very advantageous to them, but she felt that they shouldn't let their guard down. If you were King Ping, what would you do? Xiao threw the question back at her. Chu Qingyan was stunned. If she were King Ping, what would she do? King Jing and King Jin suddenly went missing. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. The new emperor was held hostage. Those thieves didn't make any demands. Everything was dead silent. Now, only King Zhe and he had besieged the capital city. However, King Zhe didn't make any moves. This made him feel even more uneasy. If I were King Ping, I'd choose to join forces with King Zhe. King Jing and King Jin suddenly went missing. It's very likely that they've met with mishap. 120,000 soldiers aren't enough to fill the gaps between the capital city's teeth. Therefore, joining forces might be the most appropriate choice for now. Chu Qingyan focused on putting herself in King Ping's shoes. She thought about his identity and his way of doing things and came to this conclusion. Chu Qingyan, who was seriously thinking, did not notice that Xiao's gaze on her had a hint of admiration. She was indeed his woman to be able to think of this. But if that's the case, won't King Zhe join forces with King Ping? If that was the case, Chu Qingyan was worried. At this time, The timing is critical, Xiao Su said profoundly. Chu Qingyan didn't understand what he meant, but she soon understood. In the middle of the night, Jun Zisheng suddenly appeared at the entrance of the side hall. His face was slightly red, and he looked very excited. Chu Qingyan looked at Jun Zisheng, who was striding over. If his identity wasn't taken into consideration, he was indeed a very scholarly and handsome man. It was hard to associate him with the monarch of a country. However, after interacting with him for the past few days, this person wasn't without any redeeming qualities. At least when he gave orders, he didn't hesitate at all. He vividly displayed the cold and emotionless side of a monarch. King of England, King Zhe has surrendered, Jun Zisheng exclaimed happily before he even reached the hall. Chu Qingyan widened her eyes and looked at the person beside her. No wonder Yu Daibing said that the timing was critical. If King Zhe had already surrendered, then whatever King Ping wanted to do next would be within their control. Chapter 364. Xiao Su nodded calmly. Gentleman Sheng was stunned for a moment. His joy was quickly frozen. He smiled embarrassedly. It seemed that he already knew, or rather, everything was already under his control. Chu Qingyan snickered. Her big ice cube was so smart and powerful that it blinded Gentleman Sheng's eyes. He had already seen Xiao Su's indifference, so Gentleman Sheng no longer hesitated. For the sake of the next plan, he did not put down his pride like he did a few days ago. Instead, he asked directly, "What should we do next?" King Ping is different from the other three imperial uncles. He is not easy to deal with. Your Majesty, you don't have to worry about this. Soon, King Ping will take action when he sees that the situation is not good. At that time, we just have to act according to the circumstances. Xiao Su's expression was indifferent. He did not get carried away by the fact that he had already recovered 3/4 of his troops. Instead, he became more cautious and his expression became colder. Jun Zixing originally wanted to ask a few more questions, but because Xiao Su didn't seem to want to talk about it, Jun Zixing gave up. During this period of time, she had already seen his remarkable abilities, so there was no need for her to be worried or suspicious. Okay, we will wait for the King of England to give the order. After saying this, Gentleman Sheng was ready to leave. Ever since Xiao Su reminded him to pay attention to the movements of the civil and military officials, he asked his trusted aides to pay close attention. As expected, he found that many officials were secretly colluding with the four kings. He listened to Xiao Su's suggestion and suppressed the anger in his heart. He first monitored these people. After the rebellion of the four kings was over, he would catch all of them in one fell swoop. This way, he would have the power to deter them. Not only that, Xiao Su also suggested that he could use this opportunity to recruit some core officials to fill the vacancies of these officials when the time came, so that the entire imperial court would not be suddenly empty. Therefore, during this period of time, he did not dare to let his guard down. He knew that this was a real challenge for him since he ascended the throne. He felt the surging excitement and eagerness to try. It could be said that if he succeeded this time, it would be a reform of the imperial court and the entire Junlan state. It would be a great change of blood. For him, it would be a new beginning. But the moment he left the side hall, he couldn't help but turn back and look at the dark palace. If it weren't for the fact that Xiao Su was from Sichuan, he would definitely have poached him to Junlan. However, as soon as this thought appeared in his mind, he shook his head and rejected it. Such a person was too strong, and he probably wouldn't be able to suppress him. After Jun Zixing left, Chu Qingyan walked to Xiao Su. She tilted her head and asked in confusion, "Why didn't you tell Jun Zixing about your next plan?" Hearing this, Xiao Su put down the letter in his hand and crossed his hands on the table. The candlelight cast a dim yellow halo on his body, but made his face a little hazy, and his expression couldn't be seen clearly. His voice was a little indifferent and cold, but not too cold. King Ping is ruthless and scheming, but in the eyes of the people of Junlan State, he is a gentle and virtuous king. Do you know why? Because he is good at disguising? In her eyes, sanctimonious people don't reveal their true colors because they're too good at pretending. However, Xiao Su shook his head, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. His smile was very faint. It's not just that. It should be said that his reach is very long. He has spies all over Junlan State, so whatever kind of reputation he wants, he only needs to give an order and someone will spread it for him. Moreover, he has done so many dirty things. There is no wall in the world that doesn't have a crack, but he hid them all. This proves that he has reached the point where he can cover the sky with one hand. It's only because he cherishes his reputation that he wants to take the throne in the name of being virtuous. Otherwise, with his ability, Jun Zixing wouldn't be his opponent at all. Chu Qingyan was very surprised after hearing this. What he meant was that King Ping's men were hiding around Jun Zixing. So every time Big Ice Cube took a step forward, he would delay telling Jun Zixing the next step to prevent King Ping's spies around Jun Zixing. How did Big Ice Cube know everything? Moreover, she was even more surprised that Big Ice Cube was willing to explain so much to her. The person who usually didn't talk much was no longer so stingy with his words. As if reading her mind, Xiao Su said disapprovingly, "It's just ordinary reasoning ability. Plus, I've seen so much, so I'm used to it. At the same time, it's also to let you learn more." Big Ice Cube, should I take in a few more subordinates? Then I'll have my own manpower? Chu Qingyan's eyes were shining. When the time came, she could also send them to various places to help her collect information. Xiao Su couldn't help but hold his forehead. This little girl seemed to be concerned about the wrong thing. The news of King Zhe being subdued was suppressed. King Ping didn't receive any news about it. After a day, King Ping couldn't hold it in anymore. He sent a letter to King Zhe, wanting to discuss cooperation. Currently, there were only two paths in front of King Zhe. One was to meet force with force, and the other was to form an alliance. Actually, there was another option, which was to return to his fief. However, if Jun Zixing regained control of the three kings' military forces and took back his fief, then it would be his turn. No matter how he went back and forth, it would be a dead end. However, he wouldn't choose to meet force with force. Firstly, he was outnumbered. Secondly, it wouldn't be proper for him to obtain the throne this way. It wouldn't be in line with his title as the virtuous king. 2 days later, King Ping arrived at the Sanli Pavilion as promised. He only brought 100 light cavalry to show King Zhe's sincerity. He knew his brother well. Although he was cautious and timid, he wasn't afraid that his brother would plot against him. If something happened to him, then his brother would be even more isolated and helpless. If he didn't show up personally, his army wouldn't listen to anyone else's orders. Therefore, it was better to have one more ally than one more enemy. King Ping sat in the Sanli Pavilion and waited for half a cup of tea's time. Then, he heard a series of footsteps approaching from afar. He raised his eyebrows and turned around. He was about to welcome them with a smile when he saw who it was. "Your Majesty?" His voice was filled with disbelief and fear. "Fifth Imperial Uncle, how have you been?" Jun Zixing smiled brightly, as if the person in front of him wasn't a traitor, but an elder he respected. King Zhe, who was standing beside Jun Zixing, had a complicated expression. "Fifth Imperial brother, we've all lost. We've all lost to this brat. The person we've always looked down on turned around and bit us in the end. He did it quietly and with superb methods that caught us off guard. No, I didn't lose. You're the ones who lost." With his shrewdness, he connected the dots as soon as he saw Jun Zixing. King Ping's expression suddenly turned ferocious. He no longer looked gentle and humble. "You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.